For over 2,500 years, people just like you have turned to the Buddha's teachings when the world felt too heavy, when the mind wouldn't stop spinning, when rest seemed impossible to find tonight. You join that ancient lineage of seekers, and the Buddha's gift is as fresh now as it was then. These aren't stories about perfection or enlightenment in some far-off future. They're stories about being human, about suffering and the end of suffering, about finding peace, not by escaping your life, but by finally, fully arriving in it. The wisdom we'll explore tonight doesn't require you to believe anything or change everything. It simply asks you to listen, to soften, to notice. The peace you're longing for isn't locked away. It's right here, closer than your next breath. I'm curious about your experience with these teachings. What is it that these Buddha stories bring into your life? Do they calm your restless mind, help you sleep more peacefully, offer you a different way of seeing your challenges? I'd love to hear your reflections in the comments below. Each story we'll share tonight is like a key, not to open something locked, but to help you realize that the door was never closed at all. The Buddha discovered something remarkable, that suffering is optional, that peace is our natural state, that we can learn to hold our pain with such tenderness that it transforms. Let these teachings settle into you tonight without force or effort. You don't need to remember them or practice them or even fully understand them. Just let them be here with you, like a trusted friend sitting quietly by your side. Before we enter the first story, take a moment to care for yourself. Find a way of resting that truly supports you. Maybe you need to release the tension in your jaw, or let your legs fall open slightly, or pull the blankets up just a little higher. Whatever your body needs to feel held and safe, give yourself that gift now. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Draw in a long, slow breath through your nose, and as you exhale, imagine releasing any remaining tension from this day. Another breath, deep and nourishing, filling you with calm and release. Now we're ready. Let's begin with our first story. On the coast of a small fishing village, there lived an old fisherman named Takeshi, who had cast his nets into the sea for more than 50 years. While other fishermen in the village would return each day with boats full of fish, Takeshi's catch was often modest. Yet he seemed more content than any of them, humming to himself as he mended his nets, smiling at the horizon as if it were an old friend. The other fishermen couldn't understand it. They had newer boats, stronger nets, better equipment. They worked longer hours, went farther out to sea, employed every technique they knew to maximize their catch. Yet they always seemed worried about competition, worried about the weather, worried about next season, worried about whether they were catching enough. One day, a young fisherman named Hiro, ambitious and frustrated by his own mediocre catches despite his hard work, approached Takeshi as the old man sat mending his net on the dock. "Old uncle," Hiro said, using the term of respect though they weren't related, "may I ask you something?" Takeshi looked up, his weathered face crinkling into a smile. "Of course, young one. Sit." Hiro sat beside him, watching the old man's gnarled fingers work the net with practiced ease. "How do you stay so peaceful? Your catch is often smaller than ours, yet you never seem worried. You never seem to be rushing or striving. What is your secret?" Takeshi held up a section of his net, spreading it between his hands so the light came through the gaps. "Tell me, Hiro, what is a net made of?" Hiro looked at the net, confused by the simple question. "Rope, I suppose. Woven rope with knots." "Look closer," Takeshi said, shaking the net gently. "What else do you see?" Hiro studied it more carefully. The rope formed a pattern, yes, but between each strand. "Holes," he said. "The net is full of holes." "Exactly," Takeshi said, his eyes twinkling. "A net is more hole than rope, yes. The holes are what make it a net. Without the holes, it would just be a sheet of cloth, useless for catching fish." "I don't understand what this has to do with my question." Takeshi set down the net and looked out at the water. "When I was young, like you, I wanted to catch every fish in the sea. I would cast my net and then grip the ropes so tightly, pulling hard, afraid that fish would escape. My hands would bleed from holding so tight. My arms would ache from pulling so hard. And you know what happened?" "What?" "The fish would sense the violence of it, the desperation. The net would move through the water roughly, and fish would avoid it. Or they would escape through holes that my tight gripping actually made larger. The harder I tried to hold everything, the more I lost." Hiro leaned forward, interested now. "One day," Takeshi continued, "I was very tired. My hands hurt. My heart hurt from constant worry. I cast my net almost carelessly, too exhausted to grip tight, too worn out to pull hard. I just let the net sink naturally, let the current move it gently, and pulled it back with soft hands. And that day, my catch was the best I'd ever had." "I don't see how that's possible," Hiro said. "If you don't hold tight, won't everything escape?" Takeshi picked up the net again. "Watch." He held one section very tightly in his fist. "When I clench like this, look what happens to the net. The holes close up, the rope bunches. The net becomes smaller, more rigid. Now watch." He opened his hand, holding the net loosely across his palm. "See? The holes open, the net expands. It becomes larger, more flexible. It can hold more because I'm holding it less." He let the net rest on his lap and looked at Hiro with those eyes that had seen half a century of sunrises over water. "This is true for fish, and it's true for everything else in life. The tighter we grip, the more we lose. The more desperately we hold on, the more brittle things become. But when we hold loosely, gently, with open hands, things stay naturally." "But isn't that risky?" Hiro asked. "What if everything falls through?" "What is falling through right now?" Takeshi asked gently. "You have a boat. You have nets. You have your health. You have this sea. What exactly are you afraid of losing that you don't already risk losing by worrying about it constantly?" Hiro had no answer. He realized he spent so much energy protecting what he had, so much effort trying to guarantee future security, that he was exhausted and unhappy even though nothing had actually gone wrong yet. "I see in you what I was," Takeshi said. "You grip your life with tight fists. Your boat, your catch, your reputation, your future. You're trying to hold all of it so tightly that your hands hurt and your heart is tired. But you cannot control the sea. You cannot control the fish. You cannot control tomorrow. The only thing your tight grip accomplishes is making you suffer today." "So what should I do?" Hiro asked. "Cast your net with care, but without desperation. Pull it back with attention, but without force. Let the sea be the sea. Let the fish be the fish. Do your work, do it well, but hold the results loosely. Some days the catch will be good, some days it will be modest, some days the net will come back empty. All of this is part of fishing, part of life. When you stop fighting against this truth, when you stop gripping so tightly, something relaxes. And often, that's when everything you need comes naturally. Hero sat with this teaching for a long time, watching the waves, feeling the truth of it settle into his bones. He thought about how tightly he had been holding everything in his life, his ambitions, his worries, his plans, his fears. His whole body ached from the effort of it. The next morning, when Hero went out to fish, he tried something different. He cast his net with the same care as always, but without the desperate energy he usually brought. He didn't clench the ropes. He didn't pull with all his might. He simply allowed the net to do what a net does, and he guided it gently back to the boat. His catch that day wasn't dramatically bigger, but he noticed something else. The work felt easier. His shoulders didn't ache as much. His mind wasn't churning with anxiety. And when some fish escaped through the holes, which they always did, which they always would, he didn't feel it as a personal failure. It was just fish being fish. Over time, Hero's entire approach to fishing changed. And gradually, his entire approach to life changed with it. He held his plans more loosely. He gripped his expectations less tightly. He let people in his life be who they were without trying to control them. He stopped trying to grip the future with tight fists. Years later, young fishermen would come to Hero, asking the same question he had once asked Takeshi, and he would show them a net, spreading it in the light, teaching them about the holes that make it work. Life is like this net, he would say. It's mostly empty space, mostly things we cannot hold or control. And that's not a problem. That's what makes it work. Hold everything loosely, your work, your relationships, your achievements, your plans. Hold them with care, yes, but without that desperate grip that closes up the holes and makes everything smaller, harder, more brittle. Open your hands. Let life flow through them. You'll lose some things, yes, but you'll find you can hold so much more when you stop holding so tightly. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you might notice where you're gripping too tightly. What are you holding with clenched fists? What are you trying to control that cannot be controlled? What would happen if you opened your hands just a little and held everything more gently? The net of your life is mostly holes, mostly space, mostly mystery. This is not a flaw in the design. This is what makes it work. Hold it loosely. Let the holes be holes. Let some things escape. You cannot catch everything, and you were never meant to. But what stays when you hold it gently stays because it wants to, not because you forced it. And that makes all the difference. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. In the mountains far from any town, there lived a hermit named Ryanan who had retreated from society to live in solitude. He had built a small hut beside a stream and spent his days in meditation, contemplation, and simple living. He sought no company, spoke to no one, desired only silence and solitude. Ryanan had not always been a hermit. For many years, he had lived in the capital city, working as a scholar at a prestigious academy. He had been surrounded by people constantly, engaged in endless conversations, debates, and social obligations. His days were filled with meetings, his evenings with gatherings, his mind always occupied with the opinions and expectations of others. He had been respected in those days, successful by any measure, but he had felt increasingly hollow, as if the constant engagement with others was somehow preventing him from engaging with himself. Every conversation pulled him outward. Every social obligation demanded he present a certain face, play a certain role. He began to feel like a performer in his own life, never quite sure who he was beneath all the performances. So one day, without announcement or explanation, Rhiannon left. He walked away from his position, his reputation, his comfortable life, and disappeared into the mountains. He wanted only to be alone, to find in solitude what he had lost in society. For the first year, he lived in complete isolation. He built his hut with his own hands, slowly and carefully, in no particular hurry. He learned to grow simple vegetables. He learned the rhythms of the mountain, the patterns of weather, and the habits of the animals who shared the forest. He sat in meditation for hours each day, not trying to achieve anything, just sitting with the silence. The silence was difficult at first. His mind was so accustomed to constant stimulation that it created its own noise, replaying conversations, imagining scenarios, filling the quiet with internal chatter. But gradually, over months, the internal noise began to settle. Gaps appeared between thoughts. The silence became less empty and more full, filled with the subtle sounds of wind in trees, water over stones, his own breathing. Rhiannon found that in this silence, he could hear things he had never heard before. Not voices or supernatural sounds, but deeper truths about himself and about life. Insights would arise naturally, not from thinking or reasoning, but from simply being present. He began to understand things he had studied for years, but never really grasped. The difference between knowledge and wisdom. The difference between being alone and being lonely. The difference between silence and emptiness. But something strange began to happen. The more Rhiannon retreated into solitude, the more visitors he attracted. At first, it was just a wandering monk who happened upon his hut and asked for water. Rhiannon gave him water, and the monk went on his way. But somehow, word spread. There was a hermit in the mountains, someone who had given up the world, someone who lived in complete simplicity and silence. People began to seek him out. They would make the long journey up the mountain path, arriving at his hut with questions, seeking wisdom, wanting to learn from this man who had withdrawn from society. At first, Rhiannon was dismayed. He had come to the mountains precisely to escape people, to be alone. When he saw visitors approaching, he would hide inside his hut, waiting for them to leave. But they wouldn't leave. They would sit outside his door, sometimes for days, patient and persistent. Eventually, Rhiannon realized that hiding was pointless. These people had traveled far to see him. The least he could do was acknowledge them. So he began to receive visitors, though reluctantly. He would listen to their questions and offer what responses came to him. He never tried to be wise or profound. He simply spoke from his experience of solitude and silence. The puzzling thing was that the more plainly he spoke, the more wisdom people found in his words. When he'd lived in the city, surrounded by people, busy with social obligations and scholarly debates, No one had sought his wisdom particularly. He had been respected, certainly, but not sought out as a teacher. Now that he had nothing to say and no desire to teach, people traveled great distances to hear from him. One day, he asked a visitor directly, "Why do you come here?" "I was a scholar once, surrounded by books and ideas and other learned people. No one traveled to seek my wisdom then. Now I live in a hut in the mountains. I've read no books in years, and I have no new ideas to offer. Why travel so far to talk to someone who has nothing to give you?" The visitor, a merchant named Taro, who had closed his business for a week to make this journey, thought carefully before answering. "In town," Taro said, "everyone is so busy talking that no one is listening. Everyone has so many ideas, so many opinions, so much they want to say that there's no space for wisdom to emerge. Conversations are just people waiting for their turn to speak, not actually hearing each other. You're different. You have silence. You have space. When you speak, even just a few words, they matter because they come from stillness rather than from the noise of a busy mind." He shifted his position on the ground where they sat. "And there's something else. In the city, I'm surrounded by people, but I feel more alone than you probably do here in your solitude. Everyone wants something from me. They want my money, my influence, my agreement, my approval. Every conversation has an agenda. But you want nothing from me. You didn't ask me to come here. You gain nothing from talking to me. That makes your words trustworthy. I can actually hear them because I'm not wondering what you're trying to get from me." Another visitor, a young woman named Hana, who had been struggling with the question of whether to marry a man her family had chosen, explained her reason for coming. "Everyone in my life has an opinion about what I should do," she said. "My parents think I should marry this man because it's a good match for the family. My friends think I should refuse because I don't love him. Everyone is so certain, so full of advice, so ready to tell me the right answer. But you're the first person who didn't immediately tell me what to do. You just listened. And in that listening, in that space you created, I could finally hear my own wisdom. The answer was in me all along, but I couldn't hear it over everyone else's voices." Ryonen began to understand. It wasn't despite his solitude that people sought him out, but because of it. In his withdrawal from society, he had created something increasingly rare. Space, silence, presence unburdened by agenda or expectation. And people were drawn to that the way thirsty travelers are drawn to water in the desert. He noticed something else too. The wisdom people attributed to him wasn't really his wisdom at all. It emerged from the silence he had cultivated. In the stillness of his solitary life, he could hear things that the noise of society drowned out. He could see clearly because his vision wasn't constantly pulled in multiple directions. He could speak truthfully because he had no reputation to protect, no social position to defend, no need to appear wise or knowledgeable. In the city, he had been so concerned with how others perceived him, with maintaining his scholarly reputation, with not saying anything foolish, that his words had been calculated and careful. Now, with no one to impress and nothing to lose, he simply said what was true. And paradoxically, this made his words more valuable. A scholar from the academy where Ryonen had once taught made the journey to see him. The scholar, a man named Masao, who had been Ryanan's colleague, couldn't understand why Ryanan had left such a prestigious position. "You were brilliant," Masao said. "You could have become the head of the academy. You could have written books that would have been studied for generations. Instead, you're here in a hut in the mountains, accomplishing nothing. Don't you feel you've wasted your potential?" Ryanan smiled. "When I was at the academy, I was surrounded by brilliant people, impressive ideas, important work. But I felt empty. I was always performing, always trying to prove something, always concerned with how others judged me and my ideas. Here, I accomplish nothing by the world's standards, but I'm not empty anymore." "But you could have influenced so many people from that position," Masao protested. "I influence more people now," Ryanan replied quietly. "Not through my scholarship or my position, but through my presence. People come here seeking something they can't find in the busy world, and I can offer it to them precisely because I've stepped out of that busy world. If I had stayed at the academy, I would have had a position and a reputation, but I wouldn't have had what these people are seeking." Masao looked uncomfortable. "What exactly are they seeking?" "Space," Ryanan said. "Silence. Someone who will listen without agenda. Someone who isn't trying to convince them of anything or get anything from them. Someone who has stepped out of the endless competition and comparison and striving that fills the world. I couldn't offer that while I was still caught up in it myself." He gestured to the quiet forest around them. "This solitude isn't empty, as you seem to think. It's full of attention, presence, awareness. When you're constantly busy, constantly engaged, constantly consuming information and experience and interaction, there's no space for anything deeper to emerge. You fill your life so completely with activity that wisdom has nowhere to appear. But when you create space, when you embrace solitude even briefly, wisdom has room to arise." Masao stayed for 3 days, and during that time, something shifted in him. The first day, he kept trying to debate and discuss, to engage Ryanan in the kind of intellectual sparring they had done at the academy. But Ryanan wouldn't engage. He would simply sit in silence or make tea or suggest they walk in the forest. At first, Masao found this frustrating, but by the second day, he began to notice something. His mind, which was usually so busy with thoughts and arguments and analyses, was beginning to quiet. In the space Ryanan created through his silence, Masao's own deeper thoughts could finally surface. By the third day, Masao understood. "You're teaching me even though you're not saying much of anything," he said. "The teaching is in the space itself, in the silence. I can hear my own wisdom because you're not filling all the space with yours." Ryanan nodded. "At the academy, we competed to be the most impressive speaker, the most brilliant thinker. We filled every silence with words, every space with ideas. But wisdom doesn't emerge from fullness. It emerges from emptiness. The sage isn't the one with the most to say, but the one who creates space for what needs to be heard." Years passed, and Ryanan's hut became something of a pilgrimage site. But he never encouraged this. He never advertised his presence or claimed any special wisdom. He simply continued living as he had been, in solitude and silence, receiving those who came to him but never seeking them out. One day, a young man arrived who reminded Ryanan of himself many years ago. The young man was ambitious, successful, recognized in his field. But he was also hollow, exhausted, playing a role rather than living a life. "Should I give it all up?" the young man asked. "Should I leave society like you did?" Ryonen looked at him carefully. "Why would you do that?" "Because you found peace here. You found wisdom. Maybe I need to become a hermit too." "I didn't find peace because I became a hermit," Ryonen said. "I became a hermit because I needed to find peace and I couldn't find it in the busy world. But the lesson isn't that everyone should flee to the mountains. The lesson is about creating space, cultivating silence, stepping back from constant busyness and engagement. You can do that without leaving society." He poured tea for both of them. Some people need to physically retreat to learn solitude. Others can cultivate it right in the middle of the busy world. The external form matters less than the internal reality. What matters is whether you create space in your life for silence, for reflection, for listening to deeper wisdom. Whether you do that in a hut on a mountain or in a house in a city, the principle is the same. The young man looked disappointed. "So you're not going to tell me to become a hermit?" "I'm going to tell you to become familiar with solitude," Ryonen replied. "To learn to be alone without being lonely. To create spaces in your busy life where you're not consuming, not producing, not performing, just being. Maybe that means taking a walk alone each day. Maybe it means sitting in silence for an hour each morning. Maybe it means turning off all your devices for one day a week and just being present to yourself and to life. The specific form doesn't matter. What matters is that you stop filling every moment with activity and create space for something deeper to emerge." He looked out at the forest. "People come here thinking I have some special wisdom to give them. But all I really offer is space and silence. And they discover that in that space, their own wisdom can finally be heard. The wisdom was always there. It was just drowned out by noise and busyness. Solitude doesn't create wisdom. It reveals the wisdom that was hidden." The young man stayed for a week, and each day Ryonen gave him less and less instruction. By the end of the week, they would sit together for hours without speaking, just being present to the silence and to each other. And the young man found that these silent hours taught him more than all the words he had heard in years of seeking teachers and reading books. When he left, he thanked Ryonen. "I thought you would teach me something. Instead, you showed me how to hear what I already knew." "That's the only teaching worth giving," Ryonen replied. As more years passed, Ryonen noticed an interesting pattern. The people who traveled to see him once rarely came back. It wasn't that they were disappointed, but rather that they had learned what they needed to learn. They had experienced solitude, discovered their own inner wisdom, and carried that back to their lives. They didn't need to keep returning because the teaching wasn't dependent on his physical presence. It was about a principle they could apply anywhere. A few visitors did return, usually in times of crisis or transition, and Ryonen always received them, but he noticed that these return visits were shorter. The people knew now how to create their own space, their own silence. They came not because they needed him specifically, but because his hut represented a physical manifestation of the inner solitude they were learning to cultivate. One day, an old friend from his academy days came to visit. This friend, whose name was Kenji, had become the head of the academy, achieving the position Ryonen could have had. He arrived looking exhausted, burdened by responsibility and expectation. "I've achieved everything we once talked about achieving," Kenji said. "I have the position, the respect, the influence. So why do I feel so empty?" Ryonen recognized this emptiness. It was what he had felt all those years ago, what had driven him to the mountains. "Because you have everything except space," Ryonen said. "Your life is so full of accomplishment that there's no room left for being. You've filled every moment with doing, and you've lost touch with the silence beneath all the doing." "But I can't just abandon everything," Kenji protested. "I have responsibilities. People depend on me." "I'm not suggesting you abandon anything," Ryonen replied. "I'm suggesting you find spaces within your full life where you can be empty, even brief moments of solitude, of silence, of stopping. These moments are not wasted time. They're the moments where you reconnect with who you are beneath all your roles and responsibilities." He stood up and walked to the edge of his small clearing. "I came to the mountains because I needed radical solitude to remember myself. But now I carry that solitude with me. Even when visitors are here, even when I'm engaged with others, there's a core of silence in me that remains untouched. That's what you need to find. Not external solitude necessarily, but internal solitude that you can access even in the middle of busyness." Kenji stayed for several days, and Ryonen taught him simple practices. Sitting in silence for even 10 minutes each morning. Taking a walk alone without purpose or destination. Eating one meal a day without distraction, just noticing the food and the act of eating. Creating small pockets of solitude within a busy life. When Kenji returned to the academy, he began implementing these practices, and he found that these small moments of solitude transformed his entire experience of his busy life. He was less reactive, more present, more capable of hearing his own wisdom beneath the noise of constant demands. He wrote to Ryonen, "I understand now what you've been teaching. Solitude isn't about being alone. It's about creating space. And that space is what allows wisdom to emerge, what allows us to hear truth, what allows us to be present rather than just constantly doing. Thank you for showing me that I didn't need to abandon my life. I just needed to find space within it." Ryonen smiled when he read this letter. This was the real teaching. Not that everyone should become a hermit, but that everyone needs solitude in some form. Space where they're not performing, not producing, not consuming, just being. As Ryonen grew older, he noticed that fewer visitors came, not because his reputation had diminished, but because the teaching had spread. People had learned to create their own solitude, their own silence. They didn't need to journey to a hut in the mountains because they had learned to find that mountain stillness within themselves wherever they were. One evening, as Ryonen sat watching the sunset from his hut, he reflected on the paradox of his life. He had retreated to solitude, seeking only to be alone, and in doing so, he had touched more lives than he ever had in his busy years at the academy. By wanting nothing, he had given something valuable. By seeking no students, he had taught countless people. By embracing emptiness, he had offered fullness. The teaching wasn't really his, he realized. It was simply what emerged when space was created. The wisdom people found when they visited him wasn't his wisdom. It was their own wisdom, finally audible in the silence he created around himself. He was just a mirror, reflecting back to people what they already knew but had forgotten in the noise of their busy lives. Tonight, as you rest, you're entering into solitude. Not the solitude of a hermit in the mountains, but the solitude of sleep, of withdrawal from the day's engagements, of stepping back from constant doing into simple being. In this solitude, you might find what busy people seek from hermits: space where your own wisdom can be heard, silence where truth can emerge, emptiness where fullness becomes apparent. You don't need to travel to mountains or build a hut or give up your life. You just need to create moments like this one. Moments where you stop filling every space with activity and allow silence to speak. The wisdom you're seeking isn't somewhere else. It's here in you, waiting to be heard. But it can only be heard in silence, in solitude, in the space you create by ceasing to be constantly busy. Rest now in the solitude of this moment. Let the silence teach you. Let the space fill you. What you've been seeking in all your busy engagement with the world is here, has always been here, waiting in the quiet. Solitude doesn't attract wisdom from outside. It reveals the wisdom that was always inside, just waiting for space to emerge. Be still, be silent, be empty, and discover that emptiness is the fullness you've been seeking all along. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. In a mountain monastery lived an old abbess named Ren, who kept in her private chamber an unusual mirror. The mirror was ancient, its surface darkened and worn until it reflected almost nothing. Visitors who saw it would often remark on its uselessness. "Your mirror shows nothing," they would say. "Why keep it? Get a new one that actually works." But Ren treasured this mirror and looked into it every morning. "It shows me exactly what I need to see," she would reply, though she never explained what she meant. One day, a vain young woman named Ayame came to the monastery seeking spiritual guidance. She was beautiful and knew it, spending hours each day on her appearance, constantly checking her reflection in every available surface. Her identity was completely wrapped up in her looks. During her first meeting with Ren, Ayame couldn't stop glancing at the darkened mirror, trying to catch a glimpse of herself. But the mirror showed nothing, just a dark, murky surface with barely a hint of reflection. "Your mirror is broken," Ayame said with annoyance. "Don't you want to see yourself?" "I see myself perfectly well in this mirror," Ren replied. "What do you see?" "Nothing. It's too dark." "Exactly," Ren said, and smiled. Ayame didn't understand, but as the days passed and she continued her stay at the monastery, she found herself repeatedly drawn to Ren's useless mirror. She would stand before it, searching for her reflection, finding almost nothing. It was deeply unsettling. Every other mirror showed her who she was, or at least showed her what she looked like. This mirror showed nothing. After a week, Ayame mentioned her frustration to Ren. "I hate your mirror. I keep looking into it hoping to see myself, but there's nothing there." "And what does that nothing teach you?" Ren asked. "That the mirror is broken." "Or that you're looking for the wrong thing," Ren suggested. "Every mirror you've ever looked into has shown you your face, your hair, your features. You've spent years studying that reflection, knowing exactly what you look like. My mirror can't show you that, so it forces you to consider, if you can't see your face, what else might you see? If appearance isn't available, what remains? Ayame thought about this. When she looked into normal mirrors, she saw features she judged. Eyes too small, nose too sharp, skin not smooth enough. She saw an image she tried to perfect, control, improve. The looking was never really seeing. It was evaluating, criticizing, trying to manage how others would perceive her. But in Ren's dark mirror, there was nothing to evaluate, no features to judge, no appearance to control. Just dark surface and, if she looked very carefully, the barest hint of a form. Not details, just presence. "What do you see when you look in your mirror?" Ayame asked Ren. "Nothing that can be improved or criticized," Ren replied. "Nothing that age can diminish or beauty can enhance. Just the simple fact of being here, looking. The mirror that shows everything tempts you to judge what you see. The mirror that shows nothing releases you from judgment." She came to stand beside Ayame before the dark mirror. "Look at us now, standing here together. Can you see our faces?" "Barely," Ayame admitted. "Can you tell which of us is more beautiful?" "No." "Can you see our ages, our features, the details that usually define us?" "No." "Then we stand equal before this mirror," Ren said. "Not as beautiful or plain, young or old, but simply as two beings, present in this moment. The mirror that shows nothing strips away all the superficial ways we distinguish ourselves and leaves only the essential fact: we are here." Over the following weeks, Ayame found herself looking into Ren's mirror more than any of the clear mirrors in the monastery. At first, this puzzled her. Why would she choose the mirror that showed nothing? But gradually she understood. She was tired of the constant judgment that came with seeing her reflection clearly. Tired of always evaluating, always trying to improve, always wondering if she looked acceptable. The dark mirror gave her relief from all that. It let her be present without being perceived, even by herself. It let her exist without the burden of appearance. "I think I'm beginning to understand," Ayame told Ren one morning. "The mirror that shows nothing is actually showing me something very important. That I exist independent of how I look. That there's a me underneath or beyond appearance. I've spent so many years focused on my reflection that I forgot there's someone doing the looking." Ren nodded with satisfaction. "The mirror that shows everything directs your attention outward, to surface and appearance. The mirror that shows nothing directs your attention inward, to the awareness that's looking. One mirror shows you an object to be evaluated. The other mirror reveals you as a subject who is aware." She touched the darkened surface gently. "Most people think a mirror's value is in how clearly it reflects. But sometimes a mirror's greatest value is in what it doesn't show. The absence of reflection can teach what the presence of reflection never could." Ayame stayed at the monastery for 6 months, and during that time, her relationship with mirrors changed completely. She no longer felt compelled to check her reflection constantly. When she did look in clear mirrors, she no longer saw an image to be judged, but simply a face, no more or less significant than any other face. "Your dark mirror freed me," she told Ren when she prepared to leave. "I thought I needed to see myself clearly to know who I was, but actually, Seeing myself clearly kept me trapped in appearance, in judgment, in the endless work of managing how I looked. Your mirror that showed nothing helped me discover the me that exists beyond appearance. After Ayami left, other students asked Ren about the mirror's teaching. Why not just remove all mirrors? One asked. If the point is to free people from attachment to appearance, why have mirrors at all? Because running from mirrors is still being controlled by them, Ren explained. The person who avoids all mirrors is as attached to appearance as the person who constantly looks. They're just attached to not looking rather than to looking. The dark mirror teaches something different. It teaches how to look without judgment, how to be aware of appearance without being enslaved by it. She held up the darkened mirror for the students to see. This mirror shows that appearance and essence are not the same. The clear mirror shows you appearance so clearly that you might mistake it for essence. This dark mirror removes appearance and asks, what remains? What are you when you can't see your face? That question leads to wisdom. A philosophical student asked, but isn't the dark mirror just another form of illusion? It hides reality rather than revealing it. Does it? Ren replied. The clear mirror shows you how light reflects off your features at this particular moment from this particular angle. Is that reality? Or is that also just one kind of information, one kind of seeing? The dark mirror shows you something the clear mirror can't. Your existence independent of your reflection. Both mirrors have their uses. The question is whether you're wise enough to learn from each what it has to teach. Years later, when Ren was dying, she gave the darkened mirror to her successor with specific instructions. Keep this mirror, even though students will mock it, even though visitors will offer to replace it. This mirror teaches what cannot be taught in words, that sometimes absence reveals more than presence, that sometimes nothing shows more than everything, that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from what we cannot see rather than from what we can. Tonight, as you rest, you might imagine looking into a mirror that shows nothing, not because the mirror is broken, but because it's teaching you something that clear mirrors never could. Without your reflection to evaluate and judge, what remains? Without your appearance to manage and improve, who are you? The mirror that shows nothing is inviting you to meet yourself beyond surface, beyond image, beyond all the ways you've learned to see yourself through others' eyes. In the dark mirror, there's just presence, just awareness, just the simple fact of being here without needing to look any particular way. Rest now in the dark mirror's teaching. Let yourself be unseen, unreflected, undefined by appearance. Let yourself exist in the space beyond image, where judgment can't reach, where evaluation has no meaning, where you simply are without needing to be any particular way. The mirror shows nothing, and in that nothing, everything essential is revealed. Sleep in that revelation tonight. In a monastery at the base of a great mountain, students gathered each year to receive teachings from the head monk, a man named Zenkai who was famous for his wisdom. Students would travel from across the country to ask him questions and receive his guidance. One year, a particularly arrogant young scholar arrived. He had studied Buddhism at several temples, read countless sutras, and believed himself quite learned. He came to test Zenkai. to see if this famous teacher truly deserved his reputation. "Master Zenkai," the scholar said, bowing with perfect form but little genuine respect, "I have a question about the teaching of emptiness. In the Heart Sutra, it says that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. But in the Lotus Sutra, there seems to be a different interpretation. How do you reconcile these apparent contradictions?" Zenkai looked at the scholar for a long moment. Then he said, "What color is the mountain?" The scholar was confused by this response, which seemed to have nothing to do with his sophisticated question. "The mountain? It's gray? Brown? I don't see how that's relevant to my question about the sutras." "Look at the mountain more carefully," Zenkai said. "What color is it really?" Irritated, but willing to play along, the scholar looked at the mountain. "It's multiple colors: gray rock, brown earth, green trees, white snow on the peak. But master, this doesn't answer my question about the sutras." "In the morning light," Zenkai continued as if the scholar hadn't spoken, "the mountain appears pink and gold. In the evening light, it turns purple and deep blue. In fog, it vanishes completely. In moonlight, it becomes silver. So what color is the mountain?" "It depends on the light, the weather, the time of day," the scholar said impatiently. "But surely you're not suggesting that we ignore the profound philosophical questions raised by the sutras in favor of simple observations about scenery." "I'm suggesting," Zenkai said gently, "that you're asking the wrong question. Or rather, you're asking the right question in the wrong way. You want me to give you an intellectually satisfying answer about emptiness that you can add to your collection of knowledge. But emptiness is not a concept to understand. It's a reality to experience." He stood up. "Come with me." Zenkai led the scholar outside and had him sit facing the mountain. "Stay here until you understand the mountain's answer," he said, and walked away. The scholar sat, confused and annoyed. This was not what he had come for. He wanted sophisticated discourse, not this simple sitting and looking. But Zenkai had set the task, and the scholar's pride wouldn't let him give up without trying. He sat there for hours, looking at the mountain. At first, his mind was full of arguments and analysis. He thought about the various sutras, about philosophical positions, about how he would describe this waste of time to his friends at the university. But as the hours passed, something shifted. The afternoon light changed. Clouds moved across the peak. A bird flew past. The mountain simply was, doing nothing, proving nothing, arguing nothing. It had no opinion about emptiness or form. It wasn't trying to be right or wrong. It was just mountain, completely present, completely itself. And sitting there, the scholar's busy mind began to quiet. His need to be right, to demonstrate his knowledge, to prove his intelligence, all of it started to seem less important. He was just a person sitting, looking at a mountain. No questions to answer, no position to defend. Just this moment of being present. As evening came, Zenkai returned. "Did the mountain answer your question?" The scholar was surprised to find he had tears in his eyes. "The mountain showed me that I was so busy being right that I'd forgotten how to simply be. I could quote sutras about emptiness, but I wasn't empty. I was full of myself, full of my knowledge, full of my need to demonstrate my understanding. The mountain doesn't try to understand itself, it just is. And in that isness, there's a kind of wisdom that all my study never touched." Zenkai nodded. You came here with the right answer to your question already prepared. You just wanted me to confirm it so you could feel superior. But I gave you a wrong answer, an irrelevant response about the color of a mountain, and that wrong answer taught you more than my right answer ever could. How so? The scholar asked. Because it frustrated your expectations. It pulled you out of your intellectual comfort zone. It made you sit with uncertainty and not knowing. It brought you into direct contact with reality instead of concepts about reality. Being right keeps you in your head. Being wrong, being confused, not knowing. These open you to actually learning something. The scholar stayed at the monastery for 3 months, not as a scholar testing a teacher, but as a genuine student. And during that time, he learned more than in all his years of study. He learned that wisdom isn't the accumulation of right answers, but the capacity to be present. He learned that understanding comes not from intellectual mastery, but from direct experience. One day, a new student arrived and asked Zenkai a complicated philosophical question. The student expected an elaborate answer, but Zenkai simply said, "What color is the mountain?" The new student looked confused, just as the scholar had. The scholar, who was nearby, smiled. He understood now. The master wasn't being cryptic or difficult. He was offering the most direct teaching possible. Stop trying to be right. Start being present. The answers you seek aren't in your head. They're in the direct experience of reality, which is always here, always available, like a mountain that needs no explanation for its being. Years later, when the former scholar had become a teacher himself, students would sometimes ask him complicated questions, showing off their learning, and he would remember Zenkai's method. Sometimes he would answer their question directly, but sometimes he would give them what appeared to be a wrong answer, an irrelevant response, something that would frustrate their expectation of being confirmed in their rightness. Being right is a prison, he would tell them when they complained. When you're sure you're right, you stop looking, stop questioning, stop being open to reality as it actually is. Sometimes the best teaching is the one that makes you wrong, that strips away your certainty, that leaves you not knowing. In that not knowing, real understanding becomes possible. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, you might notice all the ways you're trying to be right. Right about how you should relax. Right about how sleep should come. Right about what this experience should be like. What if you let go of being right? What if you allowed yourself to not know, to be uncertain, to be present to whatever this moment actually is, rather than what you think it should be? The mountain doesn't try to be the right kind of mountain. It is just a mountain, completely without self-consciousness or doubt. You don't need to be the right kind of person or rest the right way. You can just be completely, presently, without the burden of rightness. Let your certainty go. Let your need to understand go. Let yourself be wrong, confused, not knowing. And in that openness, rest comes naturally, like evening light on a mountain that never asked to be any particular color. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. There was a master calligrapher named Kenzo who had spent 40 years perfecting his craft. He could write each character with flawless precision, every stroke exactly as the ancient masters had prescribed. His work was technically perfect, exhibited in galleries, and purchased by collectors who valued his adherence to classical standards. But Kenzo had a secret dissatisfaction. Despite the praise and recognition, his work felt lifeless to him. Each piece was an exercise in replication, a demonstration of technique, but nothing more. He was copying perfection that had been established centuries ago, adding nothing of himself, discovering nothing new. One day, an important patron commissioned a piece for a temple dedication. The character to be written was Mu, meaning emptiness or void. Kenzo prepared carefully, mixing his ink to exactly the right consistency, selecting his finest brush, and setting up his workspace with meticulous attention to every detail. He had practiced this character thousands of times. He knew exactly how it should look. He visualized every stroke in his mind, preparing to execute it perfectly. But as he positioned his brush above the paper, his cat, who normally slept quietly in the corner during his work, suddenly leapt onto the table. The cat's paw hit Kenzo's arm just as he was beginning the first stroke. The brush dragged across the paper in a completely unintended direction, creating a wild, irregular mark that bore no resemblance to proper calligraphy. Kenzo's first reaction was anger. The perfect paper was ruined. Hours of preparation wasted. He would have to start over, and he was already behind schedule. He grabbed the ruined piece, intending to crumple it and throw it away, but something made him pause. He looked at the mark more carefully. The stroke was wild, yes, completely improper by classical standards. But it had an energy, a life, a spontaneous quality that none of his careful, perfect strokes ever achieved. It looked like emptiness, like void, like the very essence of Mu, in a way his technically correct versions never had. The mark captured something real about emptiness, its unpredictability, its resistance to control, its indifference to our intentions. His planned perfect versions had been illustrations of the concept. This accidental mark was somehow the thing itself. Kenzo sat staring at this mistake for over an hour. Finally, he decided to build the rest of the character around it, incorporating the wild stroke instead of starting over. The final piece was unlike anything he had ever created. It combined his technical skill with this element of pure accident, planned mastery with unplanned spontaneity. When he delivered the piece to his patron, he apologized. "I must confess, this isn't what I planned." My cat interfered, and the first stroke went completely wrong. I tried to salvage the piece, but it's not traditional calligraphy. I understand if you want me to create a new one. The patron studied the work in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "This is the finest piece you've ever created." "But it's wrong," Kenzo protested. "The first stroke violates every principle of proper form." "It's alive," the patron replied. "Your other work is beautiful, technically flawless, but it's like looking at a preserved flower. This piece is like seeing a flower growing wild. It has breath in it, spontaneity, the quality of something happening right now rather than being carefully reconstructed from the past." He hung the piece in the temple, and people came from across the region to see it. Other calligraphers studied it, trying to understand how Kenzo had achieved such vitality. Some tried to recreate the effect by deliberately making mistakes. But these forced accidents never had the same quality. The life in Kenzo's piece came from the genuineness of the accident, not from calculated imperfection. A Zen master who viewed the piece said to Kenzo, "Your cat understood something you had forgotten, that true art comes from responding to the moment, not from executing a plan. For 40 years, you've been copying the past. In one moment of accident, you created something present." "But I can't plan accidents," Kenzo said. "I can't make this happen deliberately." "Exactly," the master replied. "That's why it worked. Your planning mind, your control, your perfection, all of that had to be interrupted for something real to emerge. The cat was your teacher." From that day forward, Kenzo's approach to calligraphy changed. He still practiced technique, still maintained his skills, but he stopped trying to control every aspect of the outcome. He began leaving space for accident, for the unexpected, for the moment to contribute its own wisdom. Sometimes he would start a piece without complete preparation, letting the consistency of the ink vary, allowing the paper to be slightly wrinkled, welcoming small imperfections. Sometimes he would work faster than was comfortable, not giving himself time to calculate every movement. Sometimes he would deliberately do something unusual, breaking a rule to see what would happen. Not every piece succeeded. Many experiments failed, but the successful pieces had a quality his earlier perfect work had lacked: presence, immediacy, life. They felt like they were happening rather than being displayed. They invited the viewer into an experience rather than presenting a completed achievement. Other calligraphers criticized this departure from classical standards. "Kenzo has abandoned proper technique," they said. "He's making mistakes deliberately." This isn't true calligraphy. But Kenzo understood something they didn't. Technique wasn't being abandoned. It was being liberated. He had spent 40 years building technical mastery. Now he was learning what to do with that mastery, not to control and perfect, but to create conditions where truth could emerge spontaneously. "The technique serves spontaneity," he would tell students. "You practice until the movements are natural, until you don't have to think about them. Then you let go of trying to be perfect and allow something real to happen. The years of practice give you the skills. The letting go gives you the art." One student asked, "But how do you know when to let go? How do you know when you've practiced enough?" "You don't," Kenzo admitted. "I practiced for 40 years before my cat taught me to let go. Maybe that was too long. Maybe it wasn't long enough. The point isn't reaching some perfect amount of preparation. The point is remaining open to the moment when control needs to give way to spontaneity." He showed the student his temple piece with its wild first stroke. "I could never recreate this exactly. I could make similar pieces, but this particular mark came from this particular moment of accident. That's what makes it true. It's not a reproducible technique. It's a response to what actually happened." Years later, when Kenzo was old, he was asked to demonstrate calligraphy for the emperor. It was considered a great honor. Most calligraphers prepared extensively for such occasions, practicing for weeks to ensure a perfect demonstration. Kenzo prepared differently. He practiced just enough to be warmed up, then went to the demonstration with no fixed plan. He would respond to the moment, to the energy in the room, to whatever impulse arose. It was terrifying and exhilarating. As he stood before the emperor with brush and paper, he felt all his years of perfect control wanting to take over. The safe thing would be to execute a flawless classical piece. But instead, he paused, breathed, and let go of control. What emerged was neither perfectly planned nor completely accidental. It was something in between: technique meeting moment, skill dancing with spontaneity, the practiced hand responding to the unpracticed impulse. The character he created had both mastery and wildness, both tradition and innovation. When he finished, the emperor was silent for a moment, then said, "I have seen many demonstrations of perfect technique. This is the first time I've seen calligraphy that felt alive. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider where you're over-controlling, over-planning, and trying to perfect everything before you act. What would happen if you made space for accident, for spontaneity, for the moment to contribute its own wisdom? What if your careful plans are actually preventing something more true from emerging?" The perfect mistake teaches that life isn't lived according to plan. The most authentic moments come when planning gives way to presence, when control releases into response, when the prepared hand meets the unprepared moment. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need perfect execution. You need technique in the service of spontaneity, skill as a foundation for letting go. Rest now in the space between planning and accident, between control and release. Let yourself be like Kenzo's brush, prepared by practice, but freed from the need to be perfect. Tomorrow might bring a cat leaping onto your carefully prepared plans. Let it. The interruption might be the teacher. The accident might be the truth. The mistake might be perfect. At the edge of a farming village stood a mountain that had always been there, as far back as anyone's memory reached. It wasn't a particularly large mountain, but it cast a shadow over the village's fields each afternoon, shortening the growing season and limiting what the farmers could cultivate. The villagers had long accepted this as simply the way things were. The mountain was immovable. It had been there since time beyond memory. Complaining about it was like complaining about the sky or the sea. But there lived in the village an old woman named Uma, who had a different way of looking at things. One morning, the village headman was surprised to see Ume walking to the mountain carrying a small basket. He watched as she filled the basket with stones and soil from the mountain's base, carried it to the far edge of the village and emptied it. Then she walked back and did it again. "Ume-san," the headman called out, "what are you doing?" "I'm moving the mountain," Uma replied simply, filling her basket again. The headman laughed, thinking she was joking, but didn't laugh. She carried her basket to the far edge of the village, emptied it, and returned for another load. Over the following days, people noticed that continued this pattern. Every morning, she would make trip after trip, carrying small amounts of earth and stone from the mountain to the village edge. Each basket held perhaps as much as could fit in 2 hands. Each trip took about 10 minutes there and back. People began to talk about it. Some thought she'd lost her mind. Others thought it was a harmless eccentricity of old age. A few found it inspiring in a quixotic way, though none joined her in the work. Ume's grandson, Kenji, was embarrassed. "Grandmother," he said one evening, People are laughing at you. You're trying to move a mountain with a basket. You're wasting your time. The mountain will still be there long after you're gone. Ume looked at him with those eyes that had seen 7 decades of life. Perhaps, she said, but it will be a smaller mountain. And if others join me, it will be smaller still. And if they don't join me, well, I'll spend my remaining years doing something I believe in, rather than doing nothing because the task seems too large. But you'll never finish. No, agreed, I won't. But I'm not trying to finish. I'm just doing what can be done today. Today, I can move many baskets of earth. Tomorrow, I can move many more. The mountain doesn't have to be gone for my work to matter. She pointed to the path she had been walking between the mountain and the village edge. See? The path is already becoming smoother from my feet. That's one change. And that pile of earth I've been building. Small plants are beginning to grow in it. That's another change. The mountain itself, if you look carefully at the base where I've been working, you can see a small difference already. These are real changes, even if they're small. Kenji looked at his grandmother with new eyes. He had been measuring her work against the impossible goal of moving the entire mountain, but she was measuring it differently, by what could actually be done each day, and the small, real changes that resulted. The next morning, Kenji showed up with his own basket. I can't move a mountain, he told his grandmother, but I can move many baskets. They worked together, and the work felt different to Kenji than he expected. There was something meditative about it. The simple repetition, the clear, physical progress of each trip, the way the pile on the village edge grew visibly day by day. Within a week, 3 other villagers joined them. They didn't believe the mountain would be moved exactly, but they were moved by Ume's determination, and they discovered what she already knew. There was satisfaction in doing a small thing consistently, even if the ultimate goal seemed impossibly distant. Within a month, 12 people had joined. They organized themselves, creating a relay system that was more efficient than each person making the full round trip. Children got involved, carrying small amounts. Some people could only help for a few minutes each day, but those minutes added up. A traveling monk passed through the village and, seeing this unusual activity, asked what was happening. The old woman is moving the mountain, someone told him, pointing at Uma. The monk walked over to where Ume was filling her basket and sat down beside her. Why are you doing this? He asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Because the mountain blocks the light from our fields, Ume said. And because it can be done. But surely you don't think you can move the entire mountain? I don't know what I can ultimately accomplish, Uma replied. But I know what I can do today. Today, I can move this basket of earth from here to there. Tomorrow, I can do the same. If I do this every day, change happens. Maybe small change. Maybe not the complete change I might wish for, but change nonetheless. She stood up, her basket full, ready for another trip. Most people don't attempt good things because they don't believe they can finish them. But finishing isn't the point. Beginning is the point. Continuing is the point. Making whatever progress is possible is the point. The monk watched her walk away with her basket and found himself picking up a basket too. A year passed. The mountain was still a mountain. But the base where the villagers had been working was noticeably different. Perhaps 3 feet of height had been removed from that section. The pile on the village edge had become a small hill itself, and farmers were already using it to expand their growing space. More importantly, something had changed in the village itself. People had discovered that huge things could be approached through small, consistent actions. Problems that had seemed immovable could at least be moved a little. And moving something a little was better than standing still in despair or resignation. A farmer began applying this principle to a field that had been choked with stones. Everyone had always said it was impossible to farm, too many rocks. But the farmer began removing 1 stone at a time, day after day. Within 2 years, the field was productive. A craftsman who had always dreamed of mastering a complex technique, but thought he was too old to learn, began practicing for just an hour each day. Within 3 years, he had developed real skill. The village began to change, not because the mountain was gone, it wasn't, but because people had learned something from Ume's example. Impossibility is often just the sum of many possible small actions that no one has been willing to take consistently. 5 years after began her work, she passed away in her sleep. By that time, a significant section of the mountain's base had been moved, and the shadow it cast was measurably smaller. The growing season in the affected fields had lengthened by nearly a month. At her funeral, the village headman spoke. Ume-san taught us that we are not powerless in the face of large obstacles. We are not required to move mountains overnight. We are only required to move what we can move today. And if we do that, day after day, mountains do move. Perhaps slowly, perhaps incompletely, but they move. 20 years later, travelers coming to the village would notice something unusual about the mountain. One entire side of it was significantly lower than the other and continued to be worked on by villagers who had made it a tradition. They no longer asked whether they would finish. They simply carried their baskets, knowing that their small daily actions were part of something larger than themselves. The mountain, which had seemed eternal and immovable, had proven to be neither. It was simply a very large pile of earth and stone, and any pile, no matter how large, can be moved 1 basket at a time if someone has the patience to keep moving baskets. Tonight, as you rest, you might think about the mountains in your own life, the problems that seem too large, the changes that seem impossible, the goals that seem unreachable. You don't have to move these mountains tonight. You don't have to solve these problems completely. You just have to carry 1 basket when morning comes, and then another, and another. Great changes don't happen through massive single efforts. They happen through small, consistent actions that seem insignificant in the moment but accumulate into something transformative over time. Rest now in the knowledge that you don't have to do everything. You don't have to achieve completion. You just have to move what can be moved today, and trust that small movements, repeated faithfully, are how all mountains eventually move. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. There was a fisherman named Sato who lived in a coastal village where fishing was both a livelihood and a tradition. Every morning, the fishermen would go out in their boats, and every evening they would return with their catches. The measure of a good fisherman was simple. How many fish did you catch? Sato had been fishing since childhood. He knew the waters, understood the tides, and could read the weather. But despite all his skill and knowledge, he had a problem that plagued him. At least once a week, sometimes more, he would return with an empty net. Not a small catch, not a few fish, empty. Other fishermen would return with boats full of fish, and Sato would be pulling up nets that contained nothing but seaweed and water. It was humiliating. People in the village began to see him as unlucky, perhaps even incompetent, despite his years of experience. Sato's wife, Hana, watched her husband grow increasingly frustrated and ashamed. He would come home from these empty net days silent and dejected, barely eating, questioning his worth as a fisherman and as a provider. One day, after a particularly discouraging week where Sato had returned empty-handed 3 times, Hana said something unexpected. "I'm glad you caught no fish today." Sato looked at her in disbelief. "How can you say that?" "We need the income. The other fishermen are successful. I'm failing." "Come with me," Hana said, taking his hand. She led him to the small shrine at the edge of their property, where they would leave offerings for good fortune. On the offering plate were several small items: 3 unusual shells, a piece of interesting driftwood, a small colored stone. "Where did these come from?" Sato asked. "From your empty nets," Hana replied. "On the days when you caught no fish, you brought home these things instead. You were so focused on what you didn't catch that you never looked at what you did bring back." She picked up one of the shells. "This one you brought back 2 weeks ago. I'd never seen a shell like this before. I showed it to the teacher at the school, and she used it to teach the children about sea life. Those children learned something beautiful from your empty net." She picked up the driftwood. "This piece is so interesting in shape that the temple carver asked if he could use it for a small Buddha statue. Your failure brought something that will become sacred art." Sato looked at these objects with new eyes. He had indeed pulled them from his nets on empty days, but he had seen them as worthless, just debris that mocked him by taking the place of fish. "But we can't eat shells and driftwood," he protested. "We need fish to sell." "We need some fish," Hana agreed, "and you catch enough on your successful days. But these empty net days bring other things, things with value that can't be measured in money, and they bring something else too." "What?" "They bring your presence home to me," she said quietly. "On days when you catch many fish, you come home exhausted but proud, and you spend the evening repairing nets and equipment, already planning the next day. But on empty net days, you sit with me, you talk with me. You're actually here, not already out on the boat in your mind. I know this sounds selfish, but I treasure those days when you come home empty-handed, because I get all of you, not just your tired body." This perspective shook something loose in Sato. He had been measuring his worth entirely by fish caught, seeing empty nets as pure failure. But Hana was showing him that those apparently failed days brought other things, things he had been too ashamed to notice. A few days later, on another empty net morning, Sato pulled up his nets and found not fish, but a tangled mass of seaweed. His first reaction was the familiar frustration. But then he remembered Hana's words and looked at the seaweed more carefully. It was a type he had seen farmers collecting for fertilizer. Instead of throwing it back in disgust, he kept it. When he returned to shore, he asked one of the farmers if the seaweed was useful. The farmer's eyes lit up. "This is exactly what I need for my fields. Would you sell it to me?" The money from the seaweed wasn't as much as fish would have brought, but it was something. And more than that, Sato realized he had just turned a failed fishing day into a successful day by changing what he was looking for. He began experimenting with this perspective. On days when fish weren't biting, instead of stubbornly keeping his nets in the water, he would pay attention to what else was happening. He noticed patterns in bird behavior that told him where fish might be on better days. He observed current changes that helped him understand seasonal movements. He collected things that others might value: certain shells, seaweed, and interesting stones. But perhaps most importantly, he stopped defining himself solely by the fish caught. He began to see himself not just as a fisherman, but as someone who harvested from the sea. Sometimes the harvest was fish. Sometimes it was knowledge. Sometimes it was presence of his wife. Sometimes it was objects that others valued for reasons he had never considered. Other fishermen noticed the change in Sato. He no longer came to shore on empty net days looking defeated and ashamed. He seemed interested in what he had found, curious about the day's experience even if it hadn't been conventionally successful. One young fisherman who was struggling with his own inconsistent catches asked Sato, "How do you stay positive when you fail?" "I stopped calling it failure," Sato replied. "Some days I catch fish. Some days I catch other things. Some days I catch nothing but return with more understanding of the sea. Every day has value if I'm looking for value rather than defining success narrowly." He showed the young fisherman his collection of interesting finds from supposedly failed days. "If I had been catching fish every single day, I never would have noticed any of this. My failure to catch fish opened my attention to everything else. Now I know the sea that the most successful fishermen don't have, because their constant success never forced them to look at anything else." A Zen monk who was visiting the village heard about Sato's philosophy and came to talk with him. "You've learned something that many people never learn," the monk said. "You've learned that failure and success are not opposites but neighbors. Sometimes what looks like failure is actually success, in a form you didn't recognize. Sometimes getting what you wanted would have prevented you from discovering something more valuable." Sato nodded. "For years, I prayed to the sea gods to never return with empty nets. Now I understand that the empty nets were answering a different prayer, one I didn't know I was making. They were teaching me to see value beyond the obvious, to measure worth by more than one standard, to be present to what is, rather than always grasping for what should be." The monk smiled. "The empty net is a great teacher. Because it's empty, it can receive anything. Because it failed to catch what you were seeking, it caught things you weren't looking for. Sometimes the best gifts come through the door of apparent failure." Years later, when Sato was old and teaching his grandson to fish, the boy became discouraged after several days with small catches. "Grandfather, I'm not good at this. I keep failing." Sato smiled and showed his grandson the collection he had accumulated over the years. Unusual shells, interesting stones, pieces of driftwood, observations written down about sea and weather, and recipes for using seaweed. All of these came from days when I caught few or no fish, If every day had been successful by the measure I was using, then I would never have discovered any of this. Sometimes the empty net brings exactly what you need, just not what you wanted. He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Don't fear failure. Don't rush to judge whether a day was successful or not. Some of my best days looked like my worst days at the time. The measure of success that seems obvious often isn't the most important one. Keep your eyes open for what the sea is actually offering you, not just what you came looking for. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own empty nets. What apparent failures in your life might be successes, wearing different clothes? What disappointments might have brought gifts you were too focused on the disappointment to notice? What seemed like coming up empty might have actually been receiving something more valuable than what you were seeking. You don't need to catch fish every day. You don't need to succeed by conventional measures every time. Sometimes the empty net is exactly what you need, bringing lessons and gifts that success would have prevented you from receiving. Sometimes failure is just success that requires better eyes to see it. Rest now in acceptance of all your empty nets, all your apparent failures, all the times you came up short by the measures you were using. These weren't wastes. They were opportunities to learn different measures, to discover unexpected value, to receive what you weren't looking for but desperately needed. The empty net isn't a tragedy, it's a teaching. Let it teach you tonight, as you rest in the emptiness that's actually fullness waiting to be recognized. In an ancient temple, there lived a cat named Tama, who seemed to do nothing but sleep in the sun. While monks meditated, Tama napped. While monks worked, Tama lounged. While monks studied, Tama groomed herself lazily. To visitors, the cat appeared to be a freeloader, enjoying the temple's hospitality while contributing nothing. A new abbot arrived at the temple, a young man named Ryokan, who believed in efficiency and purpose. He was troubled by the cat's apparent uselessness. "That cat does nothing," he complained to the senior monks. "She just sleeps and eats. Why do we keep her?" The senior monks smiled but said nothing. They had learned long ago that Tama's purpose wasn't obvious to everyone immediately. Ryokan decided the cat had to earn her keep. He began assigning her duties: chase mice in the storage rooms, patrol the gardens for pests, anything productive. But Tama ignored these assignments. She continued her routine of sleeping in sunny spots, occasionally stretching, maintaining her serene presence. Frustrated, Ryokan announced his intention to find the cat a new home. We cannot justify feeding an animal that serves no purpose. That very night, as if to prove his point, mice invaded the temple's grain storage. Ryokan rushed to wake the cat, to put her to work catching these pests. But he couldn't find her. She wasn't in any of her usual sleeping spots. Then he heard it. A soft, steady purring coming from the storage room. He opened the door and found Tama sitting perfectly still in the center of the room. She wasn't chasing mice. She wasn't even moving. She was just sitting, present, alert, purring quietly. And there were no mice in the room. Ryokan could hear them in the walls, could hear them trying to enter, but none crossed the threshold where Tama sat. Her mere presence, her calm watchfulness, was keeping them at bay. She didn't need to chase them. She didn't need to kill them. She just needed to be there, Ryokan watched for over an hour. Tama never moved, never broke her meditation. She was like a guardian statue, her presence creating a boundary that mice instinctively wouldn't cross. Finally, as dawn approached, she stood, stretched, and calmly walked out of the storage room, heading for her favorite sunny spot. The senior monks found Ryokan standing in wonder. "She does have a purpose," he said quietly. "Yes," one of the senior monks replied, "but not the purpose you imagined. You wanted her to chase and hunt. You wanted visible action, measurable productivity. But Tama's gift is presence. She protects through being, not through doing. The mice sense a predator and stay away. She doesn't have to work hard. She just has to be what she is." Another monk added, "We tried to train cats before Tama. Cats that were energetic hunters, always chasing, always catching. But they disturbed the temple's peace. They left dead mice everywhere. They were exhausting to live with. Tama protects quietly, peacefully, just by being present. Her seeming laziness is actually perfect efficiency." Ryokan bowed to the cat, who had settled into a patch of morning sun and was already falling asleep. "Forgive me, Tama. I judged your worth by my standards instead of understanding your actual purpose." From that day forward, Ryokan looked at everything in the temple differently. The old plum tree that no longer bore fruit, he had planned to cut down. But the monks showed him how its branches were perfect for birds to nest in, how its shade cooled the meditation hall on summer days, how its twisted trunk was beautiful in a way that useful, productive trees never were. Its purpose wasn't production, its purpose was beauty and shelter. The ancient bell that was cracked and no longer rang clearly, he wanted to replace. But the monks explained that its imperfect tone was beloved, that its crack created a unique sound found nowhere else, and that generations of monks had learned to meditate to this particular tone. Its flaw was actually its distinction. The novice monk who seemed slow at learning, whom Ryokan had considered asking to leave, turned out to be extraordinarily patient with visitors, able to sit with grieving people for hours without becoming uncomfortable. His slowness at intellectual tasks was balanced by his gift for compassionate presence. "I've been judging everything by a narrow standard," Ryokan confessed to the senior monks. "Productivity, efficiency, obvious usefulness. But the temple isn't a business, it's an ecosystem. Everything has its place, its purpose, even if that purpose isn't immediately obvious or doesn't fit conventional measures of value." He spent hours watching Tama, learning from her. She seemed to do nothing, yet her presence maintained order. She appeared lazy, yet she was perfectly alert when needed. She looked like a burden, yet she contributed essential value. She taught that being can be as important as doing, that presence can accomplish what action cannot, that some purposes are served by appearing purposeless. One day, a wealthy donor visited the temple and was offended to see a cat sleeping on expensive cushions in the main hall. "Why do you allow this animal such privilege? She produces nothing." Ryokan smiled and told the story of Tama and the mice. "She produces protection through presence. She contributes peace through her serene being. Her value can't be measured in conventional terms, but it's real and essential. She teaches us that purpose isn't always about production or visible action. Sometimes purpose is about simply being what you are, fully and completely in the right place." The donor looked skeptical. So Ryokan continued, "You're a wealthy merchant. You measure value in terms of production, profit, and tangible results, but not everything valuable can be measured that way. How do you measure the worth of beauty, of peace, of a presence that prevents problems rather than solving them? Tama's purpose is subtle but essential. Without her, we would have chaos. With her, we have order. That she achieves this through napping rather than through frantic activity doesn't diminish her contribution." Years passed, and eventually Tama grew old and died. The monks gave her a funeral with full honors, acknowledging her years of service. They tried to find another cat to serve her function, but none could quite match her particular gift. Some cats were too aggressive, chasing everything and disturbing the peace. Others were too passive, failing to maintain the protective presence that Tama had embodied. Finally, they found a cat with Tama's quality, a calm, serene presence that protected through being rather than doing. This cat they named Tama II, and she took up residence in the sunny spots her predecessor had loved, continuing the tradition of purposeful purposelessness. Ryokan, now an old man himself, would often sit with the new Tama and remember the lessons the original had taught him. "Every being has its place in the whole," he would tell young monks, "but that place might not look like what we expect." Purpose isn't always about obvious productivity. Sometimes it's about being present, being yourself, contributing in ways that aren't measurable but are nonetheless essential. He would point to the sleeping cat. Tama teaches us not to judge too quickly, not to assess worth by narrow standards, not to dismiss what we don't immediately understand. She teaches us that the temple, like all of life, is an ecosystem where even the apparently useless serves a purpose, where presence matters as much as action, where being is as valuable as doing. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own purpose. Perhaps you've been judging yourself by standards that don't fit what you actually are. Perhaps you've been trying to be productive in ways that go against your nature. Perhaps you've been dismissing your own value because it doesn't fit conventional measures. What if your purpose, like Tama's, is partly about presence, about being what you are, where you are, contributing value that isn't always visible or measurable? What if your times of rest, of apparent inactivity, of just being present, are actually serving important purposes that busy productivity never could? You don't have to chase and hunt and constantly produce to have worth. Sometimes protection comes through peaceful presence. Sometimes order is maintained through calm being. Sometimes the most valuable thing you can do is rest completely, be present fully, and trust that your very existence contributes to the whole in ways you may never fully understand. Sleep now like Tama, knowing that even in sleeping, you serve a purpose. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. There was a ship's navigator named Takeshi who prided himself on never losing his way. He had sailed the coastal waters for 20 years, and in all that time, he had never once deviated from his intended course. He relied on a compass that had been given to him by his father, a master navigator, and this compass had never failed him. Takeshi's confidence in his navigational abilities was absolute. He knew exactly where he was at all times, could calculate his position by the stars, by the currents, by the wind. His captain trusted him completely, and other sailors spoke of Takeshi as someone who could navigate through the darkest night or the heaviest fog without ever being uncertain of his position. But one day, during what should have been a routine voyage along a familiar coast, something happened that shattered Takeshi's certainty. His compass began behaving strangely. The needle wavered, spun unpredictably, and then stopped working entirely. When Takeshi tried to get his bearings from the stars, heavy clouds covered the sky. The familiar landmarks he usually used were hidden by an unusual mist. For the first time in 20 years, Takeshi was lost. His initial reaction was panic. Without his compass, without his usual reference points, he felt completely disoriented. The ship was still moving, but he had no confidence in the direction they were heading. Every decision felt uncertain. Should they continue forward or turn back? Should they anchor and wait for the fog to clear, or try to push through? The captain came to find him. "Takeshi, what's our position?" "I don't know," Takeshi admitted, the words painful to say. "My compass is broken. I can't see the stars. The landmarks are hidden. Captain, I'm lost." The captain was quiet for a moment, then said something unexpected. "Good. Maybe now you'll actually see where we are." Takeshi was confused. "But I don't know where we are." "That's the problem. You've sailed these waters for 20 years, the captain said. You've relied on your instruments and your calculations. But have you ever really looked at the water itself? Have you ever paid attention to how it feels to sail through it, rather than just measuring your position within it?" The captain walked to the rail and looked out at the misty water. "When I started sailing, I had no instruments. I learned to read the water, the wind, the subtle signs that told me where I was and where I was going. You've always had your compass, so you never develop that sense. Maybe being lost is your opportunity to find a different way of knowing." Takeshi wanted to argue, but the truth was they had no choice. The compass was broken, and no amount of worry would fix it. He would have to navigate without his primary tool, without the certainty he had always relied on. So he began to pay attention in ways he never had before. He noticed the color of the water, which changed subtly with depth and seafloor composition. He felt the temperature of the wind on his face, which varied based on what land masses it had passed over. He watched the patterns of seabirds, which could indicate proximity to shore. He listened to the sound of the waves against the hull, which changed depending on bottom depth and current patterns. All of these signs had always been there. He just had never needed to notice them because his compass had told him everything he thought he needed to know. Now, forced to rely on more subtle indicators, he discovered a whole language of navigation he had been blind to. After several hours of this intense attention, Takeshi realized something. He had a sense of where they were, not the precise, measured certainty his compass had provided, but a felt sense, an intuitive knowing based on multiple subtle cues. It wasn't as comfortable as the false certainty his compass had given him, but it felt more real, more connected to the actual experience of being on the water. He gave the captain his best estimate of their position and the direction they should sail. "Are you sure?" the captain asked. "No," Takeshi admitted, "but I'm not completely lost either. I'm somewhere in between, navigating by feel rather than by certainty. They sailed based on Takeshi's intuitive navigation. Several hours later, when the fog finally cleared, they discovered they were exactly where Takeshi had estimated, perhaps even more accurately positioned than if he had been rigidly following his compass bearing. A Zen monk was traveling on the ship, making a pilgrimage to a distant temple. He had watched Takeshi's struggle with interest. That evening, he approached the navigator. "You've learned something valuable today," the monk said. "I've learned that I've been overly dependent on my tools," Takeshi replied. "That's a humbling lesson." "More than that," the monk said, "you've learned that there are different kinds of knowing. The compass gave you one kind, precise, measurable, certain, but it was a narrow knowing. It told you your position, but nothing about the water you were moving through, the wind you were sailing on, the life of the ocean around you." He looked out at the darkening water. When you lost that narrow certainty, you found a broader knowing. Less precise perhaps, but more connected, more alive, more responsive to what's actually happening rather than what should be happening according to your instruments. Takeshi thought about this. But isn't certainty important? Don't we need to know where we are? "There are different kinds of certainty," the monk replied. "The compass gave you the certainty of measurement. But measurement isn't the same as understanding. Today, without your compass, you develop the certainty of relationship. You know where you are not because an instrument tells you, but because you're in relationship with the water, the wind, the birds, all the subtle signs. This kind of knowing is less precise but more intimate." Over the following days, even after Takeshi had replaced his broken compass with a new one, he found himself relying on it less. He had discovered that he could navigate by reading the signs around him, by paying attention to subtle cues, by trusting his felt sense of position and direction. The compass was useful for confirmation, but he no longer needed it as his primary tool. Other navigators noticed the change in Takeshi's approach. He seemed more relaxed, more connected to the sailing itself, rather than anxiously checking his instruments every few minutes. Younger navigators would ask him for advice. "The most important thing," Takeshi would tell them, "is to not become so dependent on your tools that you lose your own capacity to sense and understand. Tools are useful, compasses are valuable, but if you rely on them exclusively, you become helpless when they fail. And more than that, you miss the actual experience of navigating, of being in relationship with the water you're moving through." He would tell them about the day his compass broke. "I thought I was lost, and in one way I was. I had lost my usual certainty, my measured precision. But in another way, I found something I had been missing for 20 years. I found direct contact with the elements I was navigating through. I found a different kind of knowing that doesn't come from instruments but from attention and relationship." One young navigator asked, "But what if you're wrong? What if you follow your intuition and it leads you astray?" "That can happen," Takeshi admitted. "Just as following a compass can lead you astray if the compass is broken or if there's magnetic interference you don't know about. No method is perfect. But when you're navigating by attention and relationship, you notice when things don't feel right. You can adjust. When you're blindly following an instrument, you might sail confidently in the wrong direction without realizing it until it's too late." Years passed. and Takeshi's reputation changed. Instead of being known as the navigator who never lost his way, he became known as the navigator who could find his way even when lost. People understood there was a difference, and the second reputation was actually more valuable. A merchant who hired Takeshi for a difficult voyage once asked him, "What happens if we get lost?" Takeshi smiled. "We probably will get lost at some point. Weather changes, conditions shift, instruments fail. But being lost isn't the problem. Staying lost is the problem. And I've learned how to find my way even when the usual markers are gone. Being lost has become part of how I navigate, not something I try to prevent at all costs." The voyage was indeed difficult, with unexpected storms and compass problems. But Takeshi navigated through all of it, sometimes with certainty, sometimes with intuition, sometimes acknowledging that he wasn't sure but making his best estimate based on all available information. The ship arrived safely and the merchant was impressed. "You seem comfortable with uncertainty," the merchant observed. "I've learned to be," Takeshi replied. "Certainty is valuable when you can have it, but most of life involves some degree of uncertainty, some degree of not knowing exactly where you are or where you're going. The question is whether that uncertainty paralyzes you or whether you can navigate through it, using whatever signs are available, trusting your judgment, adjusting as you go." He looked out at the harbor where they had docked. "That day my compass broke was one of the most important days of my sailing life. It forced me to develop capacities I had been neglecting. It taught me that there are many ways of knowing, and the most precise isn't always the most useful. It showed me that being lost can be the beginning of finding a better way." The merchant nodded thoughtfully. "I think I've been sailing through my business life the same way you used to sail, following my instruments, my plans, my certainties. And when things don't go according to plan, when my compass breaks, I panic. Maybe I need to learn what you learned." "Maybe you do," Takeshi agreed. "Maybe we all do. Because life is going to break our compasses. It's going to take away our certainties and our familiar reference points. The question is whether we fall apart when that happens, or whether we discover we have other capacities, other ways of knowing, other methods of finding our way. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what compasses have broken in your life. What certainties have you lost? What familiar reference points are no longer available? These losses can feel frightening, disorienting, like being lost at sea without navigation tools. But what if being lost isn't the disaster you think it is? What if it's an opportunity to develop new capacities, to discover ways of knowing and navigating that you've been neglecting? What if the broken compass is forcing you to pay attention in new ways, to trust senses you've been ignoring, to find your way through relationship and intuition rather than measurement and certainty? You don't need to know exactly where you are right now. You don't need perfect clarity about your direction. You're not lost in a catastrophic sense. You're just navigating without your usual instruments, which means you have to pay attention more closely, trust yourself more deeply, be more present to subtle signs and signals. Rest in the uncertainty tonight. Let yourself not know. Let yourself be somewhere between lost and found, navigating by feel, trusting that you have capacities beyond your usual tools. The compass will break sometimes. That's not failure. That's life inviting you to find a different way, a deeper way, a way that connects you more intimately with the journey itself. You know more than you think you know. You can find your way even when you can't measure your position. Being lost is just another form of navigation, one that requires more attention, more presence, more trust. And sometimes, being lost leads you to places you never would have discovered if you had stayed on your carefully plotted course. Sleep now in the uncertainty. You don't need a compass to rest. You don't need to know where you are to be okay right here. Let yourself drift without reference points, trusting that you'll find your way when morning comes, not through certainty, but through attention, not through instruments, but through relationship with whatever each moment brings. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. There was a monk named Ryusei who lived simply in a small temple at the edge of a town. He owned very little, just what was necessary for his practice and daily life. Among his few possessions was a pair of sturdy sandals he had received as a gift from his teacher when he first became a monk. They were well made, comfortable, and had served him faithfully for 7 years. One morning, Ryusei woke to discover his sandals were gone. Someone had stolen them during the night. He stood at the temple entrance, looking at the empty space where his shoes had been, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Anger at the theft, worry about how he would afford new sandals on no income, sadness at losing a gift from his beloved teacher, attachment to these particular shoes that had carried him so many miles. As he stood there, a neighbor passed by and noticed his bare feet. "Ryusei-san, where are your shoes?" "Someone took them during the night," Ryusei replied. "What? That's terrible. You should report it to the magistrate. We can't have thieves in this neighborhood." But Ryusei shook his head slowly. No need to involve the magistrate. "But you need shoes!" "And the thief needs to be punished." Ryusei was quiet for a moment, watching the morning light spread across the ground. Then he said something that puzzled the neighbor. "I hope they fit him well." The night was cold. Perhaps his need for shoes was greater than mine. The neighbor went away confused, but Ryusei meant what he said. As he sat with his initial reactions of anger and loss, he began to examine them more carefully. Why was he so upset? Because someone had taken something that belonged to him. But had it really belonged to him? He hadn't made the sandals himself. They had been given to him by his teacher, who had received them from someone else, who had purchased them from a craftsman who made them from materials that came from plants and animals, which came from the earth. At what point in this chain had the sandals become his? He had been using them, yes, they had been in his possession. But possession is temporary, always. Whether stolen, worn out, or outlived by his own death, those sandals were never going to be his permanently. They were just passing through his life for a time, and now they had passed on to someone else. This understanding brought a strange peace. Instead of focusing on what he had lost, Ryusei found himself thinking about the person who had taken the shoes. What desperation drives someone to steal shoes from a poor monk? What circumstances had brought them to this temple in the middle of the night, in need of footwear? Ryusei spent the day walking barefoot, which he hadn't done since childhood. He noticed things he never noticed while wearing shoes. The texture of different surfaces beneath his feet. The temperature of stones that had been in sun versus shade. The careful attention required to avoid sharp objects. The humility of going barefoot while others wore shoes. That evening, another monk from a neighboring temple visited. Hearing about the stolen sandals, he immediately offered Ryusei a spare pair he had. Ryusei accepted gratefully, but he noticed something. If he had spent the whole day angry about the theft, bitter about his loss, he would have missed the insights that came from walking barefoot. He would have missed the kindness of this monk's offering. He would have poisoned his whole day with resentment over something that was already gone and couldn't be changed. Instead, by letting go of attachment to the stolen shoes, by wishing well for the thief, by being present to what actually was rather than resenting what was no longer, he had passed the day in relative peace. A student who heard this story asked Ryusei, "But Master, didn't you feel angry? Isn't anger at injustice natural?" "Of course I felt angry," Ryusei replied. "For about 10 minutes, anger arose, just as it arises for anyone when something is taken from them. But then I had a choice. I could feed that anger, nurture it, build stories around it, carry it with me all day, letting it poison my mind and disturb my peace. Or I could acknowledge it, let it pass, and choose a different relationship with what had happened." "But the thief should be punished," the student insisted. "What he did was wrong." "Perhaps he will be punished by his own conscience," Ryusei said. "Perhaps he is punished already by whatever circumstances drove him to steal from a poor monk. But whether he is punished or not is not my concern. My concern is whether I will punish myself by holding resentment or free myself by letting go." He looked at his new sandals, the gift from his fellow monk. "These shoes came to me because those shoes left me. If I had been so attached to the old shoes that I refused to accept new ones, I would still be barefoot." Life is constantly taking things from us and giving things to us. We suffer when we cling too tightly to what's being taken, and when we refuse to receive what's being offered. The student was quiet, thinking about this teaching. Finally, he asked, "So you're saying we shouldn't care about our possessions? We should just let people take whatever they want?" "I'm saying we should hold our possessions lightly," Ryusei replied. "Use them while we have them, appreciate them, but know that we never truly own anything. Everything we think we possess is just temporarily in our care. When it leaves us, whether through loss or theft or natural decay, we can let it go without adding the suffering of clinging to the simple fact of its absence." He smiled, remembering the cold night when his shoes were taken. "That thief taught me something valuable. He showed me how attached I was to those sandals, how much of my sense of security was tied to possessions. He gave me an opportunity to practice letting go. In a way, though it wasn't his intention, he gave me a gift even as he took something from me." Years later, Ryusei would tell people, "The shoes I lost mattered less than what I learned by losing them. The thief took my sandals, but gave me a teaching about non-attachment. Most of what we think we own, we don't. Most of what we think we need, we don't. And most of what we think would destroy us to lose we can actually live without quite peacefully. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider what you're holding too tightly. What possessions, what relationships, what ideas, what version of yourself are you clinging to, fearing their loss? What if you held these things the way Ryusei learned to hold his sandals? With appreciation while they're present, with acceptance when they leave. Nothing you possess is truly yours to keep. Everything is temporary, passing through your life for a time. This doesn't mean you can't enjoy these things or care for them. It means you don't have to suffer when they inevitably pass on. Rest now in empty hands, knowing that holding loosely allows life to flow through your grasp. What needs to stay will stay. What needs to go will go. And you can be at peace either way, not because you don't care, but because you understand that ownership was always an illusion and loss was always inevitable. Let go tonight of everything you've been trying so hard to hold onto, and notice how light your hands feel when they're finally open. In a village known for its beautiful gardens, there lived a gardener named Sora who had inherited a plot of land from her grandmother. It was good land, fertile soil, adequate water, positioned to receive both morning and afternoon sun. Sora's neighbours on every side had transformed their properties into showcases of horticultural ambition. There were formal gardens with meticulously pruned trees, vegetable gardens yielding abundant crops, flower gardens that bloomed in careful succession throughout the seasons. But Sora's plot remained empty. Month after month, season after season, year after year, Sora did nothing with her land. She didn't plant, she didn't build, she didn't design or plan or cultivate. She simply left it alone. The neighbours whispered about this. What a waste, they said. Such good land going unused. Some thought Sora was lazy. Others thought she was confused, perhaps not knowing how to garden. A few felt insulted, as if Sora's empty plot was a criticism of their own elaborate efforts. One neighbour, a proud man named Takeshi, whose garden featured rare specimens from distant provinces, finally confronted Sora one spring morning. "Excuse me," he said, his tone barely polite, "but don't you think you should do something with your land? It's an eyesore, frankly. Just weeds and wild grass. You're bringing down the beauty of the whole neighborhood." Sora, who had been sitting on her porch drinking tea, smiled gently. "What would you suggest I plant?" "Well, anything," Takeshi gestured expansively. "Vegetables, flowers, trees. Something useful or beautiful. Something that shows you care." "Come," Sora said, standing up. "Let me show you something." She led Takeshi into her supposedly empty plot, but as they walked among the unmown grass and untamed growth, Takeshi began to notice things he hadn't seen from a distance. There were wild flowers he had never seen in cultivated gardens, small, delicate blooms that seemed to glow in the morning light. There were butterflies of species he'd never encountered in his own carefully managed space. Birds nested in the natural tangles of vegetation, singing songs that his pruned and ordered trees never hosted. "Look here," Sora said, kneeling by a patch of plants. "These herbs grow wild here. They're medicinal. I gather them for the village doctor. And see this area? In autumn, mushrooms appear here that are delicious and valuable. I don't plant them. They simply come because the conditions are right. She stood and walked further into the space. This grass that looks so messy to you, it's habitat for insects that pollinate crops for miles around. Those weeds you mentioned, several are actually rare native plants that have disappeared from cultivated areas. They only survive here because I don't pull them out. Takeshi looked around with new eyes. What he had seen as neglected chaos was actually a thriving ecosystem. What he had judged as emptiness was actually fullness of a different kind. "But you didn't plant any of this," he said, still confused. "You didn't make it happen." "Exactly," Sora replied. "I didn't plant because the land knew better than I did what should grow here. My grandmother taught me this. She said, sometimes the wisest action is to do nothing. Not from laziness, but from trust. Trust that nature has its own intelligence. Trust that things want to grow. Trust that not every space needs to be controlled and designed and managed." She bent down and touched the wild grass gently. "If I had planted a formal garden, I would be fighting against this land's nature. I would pull these native plants to make room for what I decided should be here. I would disrupt the birds and butterflies. I would impose my idea of beauty onto something that already has its own beauty. And I would be working constantly, weeding, watering, pruning, managing. Instead, I do almost nothing, and look what abundance appears." Takeshi was quiet for a long moment. He thought about his own garden, the hours of work it demanded, the constant vigilance against anything growing where he hadn't planned, the way he fought against the land's own tendencies to maintain his vision of order and beauty. "But don't you want to create something?" he asked. "Don't you want to make your mark?" "I am making my mark," Sora said. "I'm making it by not making it. I'm creating space for things to be what they naturally are, rather than forcing them to be what I think they should be. My grandmother said this too. Wu Wei, action through non-action. The doing that comes from not doing. This is not the same as doing nothing. This is carefully doing nothing, intentionally not interfering, wisely allowing." Over the following months, Takeshi found himself visiting Sora's wild plot more often. There was something restful about it, something his own controlled garden didn't offer. In his garden, every plant was in its place, every edge was trimmed, everything was as it should be, according to his plan. It was beautiful, but it was also rigid, tense. It required constant maintenance to prevent nature from asserting its own ideas. In Sora's plot, everything was relaxed. Plants grew where they wanted. Animals came and went freely. The whole space had a quality of natural ease that invited him to ease as well. One day he asked Sora, "How do you know when to act and when not to act? How do you know when doing nothing is wisdom and when it's just avoidance?" Sora thought about this carefully. "I watch," she said. "I pay attention. When I see something struggling that needs help, I help. When I see something growing well on its own, I leave it alone. When I see an invasive plant that will choke out everything else, I remove it. But most of the time, I just watch and trust. The land tells me what it needs. I don't impose my ideas onto it." She smiled. "You know the difference in your own life, don't you? Sometimes you push when pushing is needed. Sometimes you rest when rest is needed. Sometimes you act. Sometimes you wait. The wisdom is in knowing which is which." not having a rule that you must always act or must always do nothing, but being present enough to sense what this particular moment is asking for. Years passed. Sora's plot remained unplanted, but it became known throughout the region as a refuge for rare plants and animals. Scientists visited to study the species that had disappeared from more cultivated areas but thrived in her space. Children came to see the butterflies and birds. People feeling stressed would sit at the edge of her property, finding peace in its wild beauty. Takeshi gradually changed his approach to his own garden. He didn't abandon it entirely, but he created areas where he did less, managed less, controlled less. And he was surprised to find that these areas often became his favorites. The places where unexpected beauty appeared, where nature revealed its own intelligence. One evening, sitting with Sora on her porch, looking out at her wild plot as fireflies began to light up the dusk, Takeshi said, "I used to think you were lazy. Now I understand you were wise. You saw that not every space needs to be filled. Not every plan needs to be executed. Not every action needs to be taken. Sometimes the most productive thing we can do is create space and then get out of the way." Sora nodded. My grandmother had one more saying. The usefulness of a cup is in its emptiness. The usefulness of a house is in its empty space. The usefulness of action is in the space around it where non-action lives. You cannot act wisely if you're always acting. You cannot create room for things to grow if you're always filling every space with your own ideas. She sipped her tea, watching the fireflies. I didn't plant this garden, but I tended it through my not planting. I created it through my not creating, and what appeared was more beautiful, more alive, more true than anything I could have forced into being. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider where in your life you're overacting, over-planning, over-controlling. Where are you filling space that might be better left empty? Where are you imposing your will onto something that has its own wisdom? Where are you so busy doing that you've forgotten the power of allowing? Rest itself is a practice of productive non-action. You don't make yourself sleep. You create conditions for sleep and then get out of the way. You don't force relaxation. You allow it by ceasing to prevent it. Let yourself be like Sora's empty garden tonight, unplanted, unmanaged, allowed to be what it naturally wants to be. Trust that things want to grow, want to rest, want to restore themselves. Your job isn't to force this process, but to create space for it, and then wisely, carefully, intentionally, do nothing at all. Sometimes the most productive thing you can do is nothing. And sometimes doing nothing is the hardest, most important work of all. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. In a forest where many birds lived, there was one small brown bird that behaved strangely. While all the other birds worked hard building nests, gathering twigs and moss and feathers, creating elaborate homes in preparation for different seasons, this bird built nothing. She would sleep one night in the hollow of a tree, the next night in thick bushes, the next night on a sheltered branch. The other birds gossiped about her. She's lazy, some said. She's foolish, others claimed. Winter will come, or the rainy season, and she'll have no shelter. She'll regret her lack of planning. The brown bird heard these comments but continued her way of living. Each evening, she would look for where to sleep, finding whatever natural shelter was available. Each morning, she would wake, eat, sing, and fly, unburdened by the need to return to any particular place. One spring, a terrible storm came through the forest. The wind howled for 3 days, trees bent and branches broke. Many carefully built nests were destroyed, torn apart by wind or crushed by falling limbs. Birds who had spent weeks constructing elaborate homes watched them disintegrate in hours. After the storm, the forest was full of distressed birds, mourning their lost nests, wondering how they would rebuild, and feeling that their security had been destroyed. But the brown bird was untroubled. The hollow tree where she had slept the night before the storm was now filled with water, so she simply found a dry hollow in a different tree. The bushes she had used the previous week were flattened, so she used different bushes. Her lack of attachment to any particular shelter meant she had lost nothing in the storm. A wise old owl, who had also lost his nest to the storm, noticed this. He approached the brown bird one morning. "I've watched you for years," the owl said, "and I always thought you were improvident, failing to plan for the future. But now I see something different. You have a kind of security that those of us with nests don't have." "What do you mean?" the bird asked. "Our security depends on things," the owl explained. "On nests, on accumulated materials, on particular places. When those things are destroyed, we feel our security is destroyed. But your security doesn't depend on anything or any place. It depends on your ability to find shelter wherever you are. That can't be destroyed by a storm." The bird tilted her head thoughtfully. "I never thought about it that way. I just go where the shelter is. If one place doesn't work, I find another place. It seems simple." "It is simple," the owl agreed. "But it requires something that's actually quite difficult, letting go of attachment to any particular place or thing. Most of us can't do that. We want the security of returning to the same nest, the same tree, the same familiar place. We want to own a piece of the forest. You're content to belong to the whole forest without owning any of it." Over the following weeks, as birds worked to rebuild their nests, some began to notice what the owl had noticed. The brown bird was never without shelter, never anxious about losing her home, never burdened by protecting what she had accumulated. She had a lightness that the nest-building birds lacked. A young bird who was exhausted from gathering materials for her third attempt at building a nest that kept falling apart asked the brown bird, "Don't you ever want a nest of your own? A place that's yours, that you can return to?" "I have the whole forest," the brown bird replied. "Every hollow tree, every sheltered branch, every thick bush, all of it is available to me. If I claimed one spot as mine, I would have less, not more. I would have one nest instead of countless possibilities." "But what about security?" the young bird persisted. "What about having something solid and permanent?" The brown bird looked at the young bird's partially built nest, already showing signs of the same structural problems that had doomed the previous 2 attempts. "Is your nest permanent? The storm showed us that nothing we build lasts forever. Everything changes. The tree that's perfect today might fall tomorrow. The branch that seems strong might break. If your security depends on things staying the same, you'll always be afraid." She ruffled her feathers and continued, My security comes from knowing I can adapt. I can find shelter in many places. I can adjust to changing conditions. I don't need things to stay the same to be okay. That's a kind of security that storms can't destroy. A monk who lived near the forest and fed the birds sometimes would observe them. He heard other humans talk about the brown bird, calling her the foolish one who didn't plan. But he saw something different. That bird understands Wu Wei, he told visitors. She flows with circumstances instead of trying to control them. She works with what is instead of clinging to what was. The other birds work very hard to create security, but their security is brittle because it depends on things staying the same. Her security is flexible because it depends on her ability to work with change. He would point to human lives too. We're like the nest-building birds. We accumulate possessions, thinking they'll make us secure. We cling to jobs, relationships, identities, thinking that if we can just keep things from changing, we'll be safe. But everything changes. The storm always comes eventually. And when it does, all that accumulated security can vanish in a day. People would ask him, so should we not plan? Not build, not try to create stability. Build if you want to build, he would reply. Plan if you want to plan. But hold it all lightly. Don't let your security depend on things remaining unchanged. Develop the brown bird skill, the ability to find shelter in new circumstances, to adapt to change, to let go of what's gone and work with what's here. That's real security, not having a nest, having the ability to live without one. Some listeners understood this teaching. They began to hold their possessions more lightly, to see their homes as temporary shelters rather than permanent fortresses, to develop skills and relationships and inner resources that could adapt to changing circumstances rather than relying on things staying the same. Others couldn't hear it. They kept building bigger nests, acquiring more stuff, trying to make themselves so secure that change couldn't touch them. And then they would suffer greatly when the inevitable storms came. The brown bird lived many years in her nestless way. When she finally died, peacefully in a hollow log during a quiet night, the forest birds gathered to remember her. Even the birds who had once mocked her improvidence now spoke of her with respect. She taught us something important, the old owl said. That true security doesn't come from having much, but from needing little. Not from keeping things the same, but from flowing with change. Not from attachment to place, but from being at home everywhere. Tonight, as you rest, you might consider your own nests. What are you clinging to, thinking it will keep you secure? What are you afraid to lose, believing that losing it would destroy your safety? What if real security came not from accumulating and protecting, but from developing the ability to adapt, to let go, to find shelter in new circumstances? You don't need to own peace to experience it. You don't need to build happiness to feel it. You don't need to nest in any particular circumstance to be okay. Like the brown bird, you can be at home in the whole forest of life, finding rest wherever you are, secure not in things staying the same, but in your to flow with whatever comes. Let go of your nest tonight. You don't need it to rest. The whole forest is yours. Every moment offers shelter if you're not too attached to the shelter of the previous moment. Rest in change. Rest in uncertainty. Rest in the knowing that you can adapt, can find what you need, can be okay without controlling everything. That's real security. And it's lighter than any nest could ever be. There was a devoted student named Akiko who studied with a Zen master for many years. She took meticulous notes on every teaching, every conversation, every insight that arose during her practice. Her room was filled with journals and scrolls, a massive accumulation of written wisdom that she treasured as proof of her learning. She would often review her notes, rereading old insights, checking her understanding against what she had written. The notes gave her a sense of security, a feeling that she was capturing and keeping the teachings, making sure nothing was lost. One day, her master, a woman named Mumon, came to Akiko's room and looked at the mountains of notes with a frown. "What is all this?" "My notes," Akiko said proudly. "Everything you've taught me over 5 years. Every koan we've discussed. Every meditation instruction. All preserved here." "Preserved?" Mumon repeated thoughtfully. "Like pickled vegetables?" Akiko laughed at the comparison. "Something like that. So I can return to these teachings whenever I need them." "Show me your understanding of the teaching we discussed yesterday," Mumon said. Akiko reached for her most recent journal and began reading her notes. Mumon stopped her. "Not what you wrote. Your understanding, without the notes." Akiko tried to explain the teaching from memory, but found she couldn't. Her mind kept trying to recall what she had written, rather than expressing what she actually understood. The notes had become a barrier between her and direct understanding. "You've been writing instead of learning," Mumon said gently. "You've been preserving teachings on paper rather than absorbing them into your being. You have accumulated much, but understood little." Akiko felt defensive. "But these notes help me remember. Without them, I would forget." "What you forget wasn't truly learned," Mumon replied. "And what you truly learn doesn't need notes to remember. Knowledge that lives only on paper is dead knowledge. It has to live in you to be real knowledge." She picked up one of Akiko's journals and read a passage about meditation. "Do you remember writing this?" "Yes, from 3 years ago. You were teaching about working with a restless mind." "And do you work with a restless mind this way?" Mumon asked. Akiko realized she didn't. She had written the teaching down, but never actually integrated it into her practice. The notes gave her the illusion of learning without the reality of it. Mumon set down the journal. "Tonight, I want you to burn all these notes." "What?" "No. These represent years of work. These represent years of writing. That's not the same as years of learning. Burn them. If the teachings took root in you, they'll survive the burning. If they didn't, then keeping the notes is just a way of avoiding that truth." Akiko spent a sleepless night agonizing over this instruction. Her notes felt like treasures, like her spiritual wealth accumulated over the years. But she trusted Mumon, so the next evening, she built a fire and with trembling hands, began feeding her journals to the flames. As each notebook burned, she felt panic and loss, years of writing disappearing into smoke and ash. But she continued, page by page, until everything was gone. She sat looking at the ashes, feeling empty and devastated. The next morning, Mumon asked her to explain a teaching from 2 years ago. Without her notes to consult, Akiko had to reach for what she actually remembered, what had actually integrated into her understanding. She was surprised to find that she could explain the teaching, not in the exact words she had written, but in her own words that expressed real understanding. "You see," Mumon said, "what truly became part of you survived the burning. What was only on paper is gone, but it was already gone in the sense that it wasn't really yours. You possessed the notes, but you didn't possess the understanding they were meant to point toward." Over the following weeks, something shifted in Akiko's learning. Without notes to rely on, she had to actually integrate teachings as they came. She had to pay a different kind of attention, not the attention of someone recording for later, but the attention of someone learning for now. She discovered that taking notes had been a way of deferring understanding. "I'll write this down and understand it later," she would think. But later never came. The act of writing created the illusion of learning while allowing actual learning to be postponed indefinitely. Now, without that crutch, she had to understand immediately. She had to ask questions in the moment rather than writing down words to puzzle over later. She had to practice teachings directly rather than preserving them for future practice. Her understanding deepened rapidly. The teachings weren't sitting on paper waiting to be reviewed. They were living in her actions, her responses, her way of being in the world. "Why did you have me burn the notes?" Akiko asked Mumon one day. "Was it to punish me for relying on them?" "Not punishment," Mumon replied. "Liberation. You were carrying a library but not living the teachings. The notes made you feel like a good student, like you were capturing and preserving wisdom. But actually, they were preventing you from being transformed by that wisdom. You were collecting teachings like butterflies in a jar, beautiful but dead, instead of learning to fly." She looked at Akiko directly. The teachings aren't meant to be possessed. They're meant to be embodied. You can't embody something while you're busy writing it down and filing it away. The burning freed you from the illusion that learning means accumulating words on paper. A fellow student who still took extensive notes heard about Akiko's burned journals and was horrified. "How can you not take notes? How will you remember everything?" "I don't remember everything," Akiko admitted. "I remember what matters. What doesn't stick naturally wasn't ready to be integrated anyway. Before, I had notes on hundreds of teachings I didn't understand or practice. Now I have no notes, but I actually live the teachings that have taken root." The other student wasn't convinced, but months later came back to Akiko. "I've been thinking about what you said. I realized I hide behind my notes. I write things down instead of changing my behavior. I accumulate teachings instead of applying them. Maybe I need to burn my notes too." "Maybe," Akiko said. "Or maybe you just need to recognize that the notes are a tool, not the goal. They can serve learning if you use them as temporary scaffolding that you eventually remove. But if you treat them as the achievement itself, they become obstacles." Years later, when Akiko became a teacher herself, she had an unusual policy. Students could take notes during the teachings, but at the end of each month, they had to burn them. "If you understood, you don't need the notes," she would tell them. "If you didn't understand, the notes won't help you. They'll just give you the illusion of understanding, while the real thing eludes you." Some students resisted this practice. "But what if I forget important things?" "Then they weren't that important," Akiko would reply, "or they weren't meant for you at this time. Trust that what you need to remember will stay with you. Trust that understanding that matters will integrate naturally. Let go of trying to capture and possess teachings. Let them flow through you, keeping what sticks and releasing what doesn't. One student said, "But I learn by writing. The act of writing helps me process and remember." "Then write," Akiko allowed. "But burn your notes afterward." Let writing be a process of learning, not a product of learning. Let it be the act of digestion, not the attempt at preservation. Write to understand in the moment, not to have something to refer back to. She showed them her empty shelves where journals used to be. "I'm lighter now. I carry less paper, but more understanding. The teachings live in how I respond to difficulty, how I meet each moment, and how I treat people. They don't live in notes tucked away in storage. This is the difference between dead knowledge and living wisdom." Tonight, as you rest, what notes are you clinging to? What accumulations of knowledge or experience are you treating as possessions rather than processes? What have you written down, filed away, or tucked into memory with the intention of understanding later, but later never comes? You don't need to keep everything. You don't need to preserve every insight, remember every lesson, or capture every moment of learning. What truly transforms you doesn't need notes to survive. It lives in you, changes you, and becomes part of how you move through the world. Rest now in the understanding that learning isn't about accumulation, but about integration. That wisdom lives not on shelves, but in actions. The most important teachings don't need to be written down because they write themselves into your very being. Let yourself be like the burned journals, emptied of words but full of understanding, lighter in paper but heavier in wisdom, possessing less but being more. The notes were never the point. The understanding they pointed toward was the point. And that understanding needs no paper to live on. It lives in you. It always has. Rest now in that living wisdom, requiring no notes, no preservation, no recording. Just being, knowing, understanding from the inside out. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. In a mountain village where mist clung to the slopes like silk, there lived a tea master named Sozin, who had perfected his craft over 40 years. His reputation had spread across 3 provinces. People said that to drink tea prepared by Sozin was to taste enlightenment itself. One autumn morning, a young merchant named Kenji arrived at Sozin's simple tea house. Kenji wore expensive robes and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had succeeded early in life. He had read 7 books about the tea ceremony. He had attended demonstrations by famous masters in the capital. He had purchased the finest tea utensils money could buy. "Master Sozin," Kenji announced as he entered, not waiting to be invited in. "I have come to learn the secrets of tea ceremony. I've studied extensively, you see. I understand the basic principles, of course. What I need from you are the advanced techniques, the hidden knowledge that books don't contain." Sozin, who had been sitting quietly by the window watching leaves drift past, turned slowly and smiled. His face was deeply lined, kind, patient as stone. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the mat across from him. Kenji sat, but even in sitting, he radiated impatience. His eyes moved around the room, cataloguing, comparing, judging. The tea house was simpler than he had expected. Bare walls, plain cushions, nothing impressive at all. Sozin began to prepare tea with movements so natural they seemed like breathing. Each gesture flowed into the next without hesitation or thought. But before he could explain anything, Kenji interrupted. Yes, I know about cleansing the implements. I've read about that. What I really want to understand is the spiritual dimension. The books mention it, but they are quite vague. Sozin nodded quietly and continued his preparation. He heated water. He measured tea. His hands moved with a grace that 40 years of daily practice had made effortless. Again, Kenji interrupted. I've been told there are different schools of thought about whisking technique. Which do you follow? I have my own theories about which is most authentic. The old master said nothing. He simply continued, reaching for a simple clay cup, placing it before his guest. Then he lifted the kettle and began to pour. The tea flowed into the cup, dark and fragrant. Steam rose. The cup filled to the brim. But Sozin didn't stop pouring. Tea spilled over the edges, pooling on the wooden tray. Still, Sozin poured. The pool spread wider, reaching the edge of the table. Tea began to drip onto the mat below. It soaked into Kenji's expensive robes. Stop! Kenji shouted, jumping back. Can't you see the cup is full? No more will go in. Sozin set down the kettle carefully. He looked at Kenji with the same gentle expression he'd worn since the beginning. In his eyes was something that wasn't quite amusement, but wasn't quite sadness either. Just a deep, patient knowing. Like this cup, he said softly. You are full of your own opinions, your own ideas, your own certainty about what you already know. How can I show you anything new when there is no space inside you to receive it? Kenji opened his mouth to argue, to explain that he wasn't full, that he was here to learn after all. But the words stopped in his throat. He looked down at his tea-soaked robes. He thought about how he had entered this room, already knowing what he would find, what he would learn, what the master would say. Had he come here to learn? Or had he come here to confirm what he already believed? Every person who came to me this week, Sozin continued, his voice still soft, still kind, had an empty cup. They knew they didn't know. You are the first to arrive with a cup already full. Kenji sat back down slowly. The tea was still dripping from the table. The sound was like a small clock, marking moments. Master, he said, and his voice was different now, smaller, younger. I don't know anything about tea at all, do I? You know many facts about tea, Sozin replied. You have gathered information like autumn leaves in a basket. But knowing about tea is not the same as knowing tea. Understanding tea ceremony from books is like understanding the ocean from a map. The map has truth in it, yes, but it is not wet. It has no salt. It cannot carry you anywhere. He poured a fresh cup, this time stopping when the cup was full. The tea ceremony is not about secrets or advanced techniques, Sozin explained. It is about presence, attention, respect, humility. These are not complicated. A child can understand them, but they are difficult because they require us to empty ourselves first. Kenji looked at the fresh cup of tea before him. Steam rose from it in delicate spirals. he realized he had never actually paid attention to tea before. He had drunk it hundreds of times while thinking about business, reading scrolls, planning his next acquisition. He had attended tea ceremonies where he spent the entire time comparing the master's technique to what he'd read in books. But right now, in this moment, he was seeing tea for the first time. He lifted the cup with both hands, the way Sozin had shown him. He brought it to his lips slowly. He tasted it, really tasted it. The bitterness, the subtle sweetness beneath, the warmth spreading through his chest. "This is the first cup of tea I've ever drunk," he said quietly. Sozin smiled. "Yes, this is humility, not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. When you empty yourself of certainty, everything becomes new. Every cup of tea is the first cup. Every breath is the first breath." Kenji stayed with Sozin for 3 months. Each day he practiced emptying his cup. It was harder than he expected. His mind kept filling itself with opinions, judgments, comparisons. But slowly he learned. Not new techniques, but a new way of being present. Years later, when Kenji had his own students, they would notice something unusual about how he taught. He never claimed to have all the answers. He never said, "This is the only way." Instead, he would ask questions. He would create space for his students to discover on their own. When asked about his approach, he would smile and tell the story of a cup that overflowed. "My master taught me that learning begins with emptiness," he would say. "The moment we think we know everything is the moment we stop growing. So I try to keep my cup empty, always ready to be filled again." This teaching about emptiness, about humility, is one that serves us even now, even here, as we prepare for rest. How often do we approach each day, each moment, each person, already full of what we think we know? How often do we miss what's actually present because we're too busy confirming our expectations? Tonight, as you settle into rest, you might practice this same emptiness. Let go of what you think you know about sleep, about relaxation, about how this should feel. Empty your cup completely. And in that emptiness, something new can pour in. Something fresh, something true. In a monastery nestled between 2 mountains, there lived a young monk named Koji, who took his responsibilities with tremendous seriousness. Each morning before dawn, he was assigned the task of sweeping the courtyard, and he approached this simple chore as if the monastery's very survival depended on it. Koji would begin his work with fierce determination, moving in perfectly straight lines from one end of the courtyard to the other. His broom strokes were methodical, precise, leaving no stone unswept. He would work for hours, his jaw clenched with concentration, his movements sharp and controlled. But the courtyard sat beneath an ancient cherry tree, and the tree had its own ideas about cleanliness. Even as Koji swept, new leaves would drift down, landing exactly where he had just cleaned. The wind would scatter dust across his perfectly swept paths. Birds would drop small twigs and seeds onto the stones. Each new bit of debris felt like a personal insult to Koji. He would rush to sweep it up, only to see 3 more leaves fall behind him. His sweeping became more frantic, more desperate. He began waking earlier and earlier, trying to finish before the wind picked up, before the birds became active, before new leaves could fall. The other monks noticed Koji's growing exhaustion. They saw the tension in his shoulders, the frustration etched across his young face. but they said nothing. This was between Koji and his teacher, Master Tenzin. Master Tenzin had been watching his students struggle for several weeks. He saw how Koji was making himself miserable over a courtyard that would never stay perfectly clean. Could never stay perfectly clean, was not meant to stay perfectly clean. One morning, as Koji was finishing his third hour of sweeping, his movements now mechanical and joyless, Master Tenzin appeared beside him. "Why do you sweep in straight lines?" the master asked, his voice mild, curious. Koji stopped, surprised by the question. "Because that's the most efficient way to cover the ground, master. Straight lines ensure I don't miss any area." "I see," Tenzin nodded thoughtfully. "And how is that working for you?" Koji wanted to say it was working fine, but honesty prevented him. "I can never seem to finish, master. As soon as I clean one section, another becomes dirty. The courtyard is never completely perfect." Tenzin made a small sound that might have been agreement or might have been something else entirely. "Today, try something different. Sweep in circles instead." "Circles?" Koji couldn't hide his confusion. "But that's inefficient. Circles will overlap. I'll sweep the same areas multiple times. It doesn't make sense." "Try it anyway," Tenzin said gently. "Just for today. Sweep in circles and see what happens." Koji wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the logical reasons why circular sweeping was inferior to his systematic approach. But one did not argue with Master Tenzin. So he adjusted his grip on the broom and began to sweep in a large, slow circle. At first it felt wrong. His mind kept trying to straighten his path, to make it more efficient, more logical. But he continued, one circular sweep after another, round and round the courtyard. Something unexpected began to happen. Without the pressure to move in straight lines, to cover ground efficiently, to finish a measurable task, Koji's body started to relax. The circular motion became almost meditative, like a moving meditation. He noticed things he had missed during weeks of intense, focused sweeping. The way morning light caught the edges of wet stones, the sound his broom made, a soft whisper against the ground, the coolness of the air before the sun rose fully, the scent of cherry blossoms from the tree above. When a leaf fell in front of him, he swept it into his circle naturally. It became part of the dance rather than an interruption to his task. When the wind scattered dust behind him, he simply came round to it again on his next pass, unhurried, untroubled. After an hour of circular sweeping, Koji stopped and looked around. The courtyard wasn't perfectly clean. It couldn't be, but it was clean enough. It was cared for. And most surprisingly, Koji himself felt peaceful for the first time in weeks. Master Tenzin returned, as if he had known exactly when Koji would understand. "Well?" the master asked. "I don't understand," Koji admitted. "The courtyard isn't any cleaner than when I swept in straight lines. In fact, by logical measurement, it might be less clean, but somehow it feels right." "What changed?" Tenzin asked. Koji thought carefully. "I stopped trying to finish. Circles have no end point, so I couldn't race toward completion. I was just sweeping. Being present with the broom, the stones, the leaves. The work itself became the point, not the finished product. And I realized the courtyard was never meant to be perfectly clean. It's outside, under a tree, in the world. Leaves will fall, wind will blow. This is natural, this is right. I was fighting against nature itself, trying to impose a perfection that doesn't exist. Tenzin smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to light up from somewhere deep inside. For weeks, you've been at war with this courtyard, at war with leaves, at war with wind, at war with imperfection. How did that feel? Exhausting, Master. I was miserable. And now? Koji looked down at his broom, at the courtyard with its scattered leaves and imperfect stones. Now I understand that I'm not here to create perfection. I'm here to care for something that will never be perfect. And that's okay. That's actually the point. From that day forward, Koji swept in circles. Other monks noticed the change in him. Where once he had been tight and tense, now he seemed relaxed. Where once his sweeping had been grim duty, now it seemed almost like a dance. Students would sometimes ask him, "Isn't circular sweeping inefficient?" And Koji would smile and reply, "It depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to achieve perfect cleanliness, then yes, it's inefficient. You'll fail either way, but you'll be miserable failing. If you're trying to be present, to care for something without attachment to perfect outcomes, then circles are the most efficient path of all." Years later, when Koji became a teacher himself, he would always observe how new students approached their tasks. When he saw someone fighting against imperfection, making themselves miserable in pursuit of an impossible standard, he would suggest they try moving in circles for a while. Perfection is a straight line that doesn't exist, he would tell them. But presence, care, acceptance, these are circles that spiral deeper and deeper into understanding. Don't fight against the nature of things. Work with it. Dance with it. Sweep in circles until you understand that the imperfect is already perfect, exactly as it is. As you rest tonight, you might consider this teaching. Where in your life are you sweeping in rigid straight lines, exhausting yourself trying to achieve a perfection that doesn't exist? What would happen if you moved in circles instead? If you let go of the end point and simply engaged fully with the present moment, imperfection and all. The courtyard of your life will never be perfectly clean. Leaves will fall. Wind will blow. This is not failure. This is life. And when you stop fighting against it, when you sweep in circles with presence and care, you might discover that what you thought was imperfect was actually complete all along. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. In a mountain monastery, there hung an ancient bronze bell in the temple courtyard. For 300 years, this bell had marked the rhythms of monastic life, calling monks to meditation at dawn, to meals at midday, to evening prayers as the sun set behind the peaks. Its deep, resonant tone could be heard throughout the valley, a voice of bronze that spoke of continuity, of tradition, of the sacred order of things. The monastery's youngest monk, a boy named Jiro, who had arrived only months before, had never known silence. He had grown up in a busy city where noise was constant. Street vendors calling, cartwheels clattering, neighbors arguing, merchants haggling, temple bells of a dozen different shrines all competing to be heard. When he came to the monastery, that single bell had seemed like a blessing. Just one sound, pure and clear, marking time with dignity. But Jiro took the bell for granted. He had heard it so many times that he no longer really heard it at all. It was just background, just part of the environment, no more remarkable than the sound of wind or the call of birds. When it rang for dawn meditation, he would stumble from his sleeping mat, still half asleep. When it rang for meals, he was often already hungry and irritated by the wait. The bell was just a signal, a command, nothing more. One autumn, the monastery's abbot, a man named Eshun, who rarely spoke but seemed to notice everything, made an unusual decision. Without explanation or announcement, he ordered that the bell should not be rung. Not for one day, but indefinitely. The bell ringer, a senior monk who had performed this duty for 20 years, looked confused but obeyed. The next morning, Jiro woke in darkness, unsure of the time. He lay there waiting for the familiar sound that would tell him dawn had arrived, that it was time to rise, time to begin the day. But no sound came. He waited longer, growing anxious. Had he somehow slept through it? Was he late? Would he be in trouble? Finally, he stumbled out into the courtyard and found other monks there, all looking similarly confused. Some had woken too early and been waiting. Others, like Jiro, had woken late, uncertain. Master Eshun appeared and said only, "No bell today. Perhaps no bell tomorrow. We shall see. Now please sit for meditation." They sat, but Jiro found it almost impossible to concentrate. He kept listening for the bell. His body expected it. His mind waited for it. Even though he knew it wouldn't ring, he couldn't stop anticipating its sound. The silence where the bell should have been was louder than the bell itself had ever been. At midday, there was no bell to call them to their meal. Some monks arrived too early and had to wait. Others came too late and found the food already distributed. The careful rhythm of the day, which had been marked by the bell for 300 years, had suddenly disappeared. Time became elastic, uncertain, strange. Evening came with no bell to mark the day's transition into night. Jiro sat in the courtyard, looking at the bell hanging silent in its wooden frame. He had passed this bell dozens of times each day for months. But he realized now that he had never really looked at it. Now, in its silence, he saw it clearly for the first time. He noticed the beautiful patina of the bronze, the way 3 centuries of weather had given it a green-black color that seemed to hold depth, like looking into deep water. He saw the intricate decorations cast into its surface, dragons and lotus flowers, and Sanskrit characters worn smooth by time. He noticed how the bell hung perfectly balanced, how the slightest touch would set it swinging, ready to speak at any moment, but choosing silence instead. Days passed, then weeks. The monks adapted to life without the bell. They learned to sense the time from the light, from the position of shadows, from the feeling in their own bodies. They became more attentive to natural rhythms, rather than relying on the bronze voice to tell them what to do. But something else happened too. The bell's absence created a different kind of presence. Monks found themselves thinking about it constantly. The silence, where the bell should have been, became a teaching in itself. One evening, Jiro approached Master Eshun in the garden. "Master," he said, bowing, "may I ask why the bell no longer rings?" Eshun looked up from the herbs he was tending. "Does it not ring? Or do you finally hear it?" Jiro frowned, confused. "I hear nothing, Master." That's the problem. The bell is silent. Sit, Eshun said, gesturing to the ground beside him. Jiro sat. When the bell rang every day, Eshun said, "Did you hear it?" "Of course, Master. We all heard it." "Did you really?" "Tell me about the sound. Describe it to me." Jiro opened his mouth and found he couldn't. He had heard the bell hundreds of times, but he couldn't describe its tone, its resonance, its particular voice. He had heard it so often that he had stopped actually listening. "You heard the command," Eshun said gently. "Wake up. Come here. Do this." But did you hear the bell itself? Did you appreciate its voice? Did you feel gratitude for its faithful service? Or had it become invisible to you, just part of the background noise of your life? Jiro felt something catch in his throat. The master was right. He had taken the bell completely for granted. "Now," Eshun continued, "now that it's silent, you think about it constantly. You notice it. You see it hanging there. You appreciate what it was. The absence has taught you to see what presence never could. This is why the bell is silent. Not because I wanted to take it away from you, but because I wanted to give it back to you. Sometimes we must lose something to truly find it." Jiro looked at the bell hanging in the courtyard, silhouetted against the darkening sky. He understood now. When the bell rang, it was just a tool, just a function. But in its silence, it had become a teacher. "There is another lesson here," Eshun said, standing up and brushing dirt from his robes. "We spend our lives filling every moment with sound, with activity, with doing. We are afraid of silence, afraid of absence, afraid of empty space. But silence teaches, absence reveals. The spaces between notes are what make music music. The pauses between words are what make speech meaningful. The rest between breaths is what makes breathing possible." He started walking toward the temple, then paused and looked back at Jiro. "The bell will ring again someday. But when it does, I hope you will hear it differently. I hope you will hear not just the sound, but the silence it emerges from. Not just the command it carries, but the gift it offers. And I hope you will remember that sometimes the deepest teaching comes not from what is present, but from what is absent." That night, lying on his sleeping mat, Jiro listened to the silence where the bell should have been. But it wasn't really silence, he realized. He could hear wind moving through trees. He could hear his own breathing. He could hear the small sounds of the monastery settling into sleep. These sounds had always been there, but the bell had covered them. Its absence revealed a whole world of subtle sound he had never noticed. 3 months later, on the first morning of winter, Master Ishan gave the signal. The bell rang again. The sound that rolled across the courtyard was the most beautiful thing Jiro had ever heard. It was deep and rich and full of resonance. It spoke of time and patience and faithful service. It spoke of continuity and change. It spoke of presence and absence, sound and silence, all woven together. Tears came to Jiro's eyes as he listened. He wasn't crying from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of finally, truly hearing something he had taken for granted for so long. From that day forward, every time the bell rang, Jiro would pause, really pause, and listen. And in listening to the bell, he learned to listen to everything more deeply. He learned that things reveal themselves most fully when we risk losing them. He learned that absence can be a kind of presence. He learned that what we take for granted becomes invisible until it's taken away. Years later, when Jiro became the bell ringer himself, he would sometimes let a full day pass in silence, just as Master Eshun had done. The younger monks would complain, would feel lost without their marker, their signal, their command. And Jiro would smile, remembering his own confusion, his own eventual understanding. The bell is always teaching, he would tell them, in sound and in silence, in presence and in absence. When you learn to hear both, you begin to understand that they are not opposites, but partners in the same dance. As you settle into rest tonight, you might notice what's absent from this moment, not in a sad way, but with curiosity. What sounds are you not hearing? What worries are not present right now? What problems are not demanding your attention in this very instant? Absence has gifts to offer. The space where sound isn't is what makes sound possible. The silence where words aren't is what makes words meaningful. The emptiness where thought isn't is what makes awareness possible. Let yourself rest in what's not here, not as loss, but as space. Empty space, silent space, open space. And in that space, you might discover a presence more profound than anything that makes noise or demands attention. You might discover that sometimes the deepest teaching, the deepest rest, the deepest peace comes not from adding something, but from letting something fall away. The bell is silent now, and in that silence, everything speaks. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.